I finally feel comfortable sharing this story, since I have now moved out of the house in question. A little bit of context is necessary. My stepmom and I at the time didn't get along. My dad also divorced her and had a different woman move in with us at the time that we lived there. I got along great with her, and this plays a part in the story. So, it was the summer before 8th grade, and the three of us, Dad, first stepmom and I, had moved into this 3-bedroom house that was pretty nice. My best friend and I were really excited, because my room was bigger and we had more things to do. The house was set up to where you could walk in the door and a closet was in front of you for coats and boots. To your right was the living room, and just beyond that was the dining room and kitchen. After, you would walk into the living room and would be going into the dining room, and there was a hallway on your left with the bathroom on the right and my parents' room on the left. The hallway then made a right and turns into the office that was on the left, with my bedroom at the end of the hall. I know it's a bit confusing, but do understand it is important to understand the story. The corner of the hallway, right where my parents' door is very dark. Abnormally dark and eerie, in fact. But I would have to walk past it if I wanted to get to my room, or go to the kitchen. Within the first week of living there, I would hear scratching in the walls between my room and the office, and any time I was in the living room, I would hear a thud from something falling. Having 2 cats, this didn't nerve me too much, since they moved to get onto things and play. I would often ignore any sounds and move on. Well, one night, I came home from a school dance with a star balloon and gave it to my stepmom for no reason. She had told me to just put it in her room, and I did. I put it in her closet. Both parents had separate closets, and the both of us forgot about it. Weeks later, she gets home from work before I get home from school. When I arrive, she confronts me about if I left the balloon in the hallway. Me being confused and having no memory about any balloon, walk into the hallway, and there is the silver balloon, fully inflated and dead center in the hallway. I rack my memory and tell her that it was from the school dance, and that it probably floated out of the room from a draft. We both knew this was very unlikely, since it would have to have gone through 2 closed doors and our AC, which was too crappy to push a balloon like that around. We both agree that's what it was, and forget about it. Cut to a few months later, and my stepmom comes up to me and explains what had just happened. She was in her room and doing her makeup. Out of the corner of her eye, where her closet was, she thought she saw me. She told me she wasn't in the mood for me messing around, but when she turned to where I was, no one was there. She then just laughs and said that it was weird. Things remained calm until after she moved out and my new stepmom moved in. Things started back up and the noises return. Again, I thought nothing of it because now we have 2 dogs plus 2 cats in the house, which is double the odd noises. My mum and I are talking about ghosts and whatnot, and she was telling me about how she can see them. After telling me about stories of previous haunted houses, she drops the bomb about a little girl in her closet, how she will sometimes move from my parents' room to the office, and sometimes would just be outside the hallway. My mum had advised me to never seek out a spirit, because they just want to be validated that they are real. That if you do, they won't leave you alone. My mum told me the girl was afraid of women, but loved my father, and that the girl would just stare at me from my mum's corner. I, being a horror movie nerd, but skeptic, decided to heed her warning and not do anything and just ignore anything strange. A few months into my mum moving in, she comes into my room late at night. She's shaking and says that there's something wrong with my dad and that she thinks only I can help. I walk in and my dad is just staring at the closet while breathing heavily and crying. My dad is very tall and a rough man who never cries or shows his fear, so seeing this was instantly alarming. I rush to his side, start calling his name and he doesn't respond, and just stares at the closet. I try asking my mum what happened, and she just said that he was trying to sleep, but woke up and started doing this. We started to try and get him up to get out of the room. Once he sat on the couch in the living room, he started coming to, asking why he was there and what happened. He insisted he go back to bed despite our protesting. The cycle of him going to bed, then starting to gasp, then crying and coming into the living room, continued until we brought him to the porch outside, where he said he felt clearly that it was like someone was hugging him, someone child size. He said he felt the little girl's sadness and that she was calling to him. He again went back into the room and started the cycle, but when he came to in the living room, he started getting violent, demanding to go into the room and that she needed him, that she was crying for him. My mother blocked the door into the hallway with a Bible and cross in hand and said that he wouldn't pass. My father then said that he knew how to get into the room and that he would sooner or later. This terrified us because my father wasn't like this and it was very much out of his personality. Anytime my mother would come near him with the Bible and a cross, he would tell her to get away, that he didn't want her near him, that he needed to go into the room because that was his room. Eventually he made a deal with us, that if he could just talk to the girl, that he would do what we wanted. That's all he needed, to talk to the girl. We begrudgingly let him, and we told him to stay in the living room. After 5 minutes he came back out, totally fine. We asked what happened, and they talked about it. He told us then what had happened before. He said that he was the little girl's mother when he was in the living room, but was the girl's father when in the bedroom. He said that the mother was just angry and hateful. This just scared my mum and I. We just wanted this all to be over because it was 3 a.m. at this point and we were exhausted. When my parents went into their room, nothing else happened. I finally fell asleep after much tossing and turning, and in the morning, my father didn't have much memory of anything, mainly just being on the couch and on the porch. I used to have many videos about this, but they got erased. My parents don't really speak about it now. One more big thing that happened after that night, but it was directed towards me. So for context, my father and I used to make it a tradition to go down to a resale shop at our last house and buy these porcelain dolls. They were very beautiful, and we'd never had any problems with them before. Neither of my stepmums were fans of the dolls because they thought they were creepy. So because I didn't have any space in the living room, I had to place them in my closet. They all stood up and were very stable, having a stand wired to their backs. So these dolls weren't moving and had stayed in that position for months. So I was in my room settling down for the night. A few minutes after I had turned off my lights and was relaxing, I heard a loud thud from my closet. My mind is racing, because I didn't know what could possibly make the noise. My brain tried to reason that perhaps one of the cats was in the closet and that they wanted out, or that maybe something just broke. I then worked up the nerve to get out of bed or to find out what it was. I could hear my heart in my eyes racing and booming. It felt like 10 minutes just standing outside my closet, trying to build up my nerve to open the door. Finally, I turned the knob and opened it. my eyes scanning the darkness. I decided to walk in to find the drawstring when I came face to face with my doll, strung up by her hair on a hanger. My scream was caught in my throat as my heart stopped. How the hell did she get like that? My dolls haven't moved in months and have never felt down that way before. It's impossible for her to have anywhere to fall from when she was originally placed and landed onto a hanger shelf. All of my dolls were crammed together, but none of them were shifted as much as an inch. The only way she could have fallen without disturbing the other dolls was to fall forwards, but she fell at an angle of 60 degrees. There's no way. I called my dad, and he just laughed at me and called me a weenie. But he did put my dolls into the attic and went to bed. Only minor things happened after that, like seeing someone walk across the doorway into the bathroom, but no one was there. The dogs going nuts for no reason, doors opening or random sounds. We've since moved, but I still get the chills when thinking about stepping into that house. I know this sounds far-fetched, but it feels good to share. I felt bad for the next people who have to move into that house, because that little girl is their problem now. They'll figure that out soon enough. Preface. When I was around 13, me and my best friend were really into the Fear Street and Goosebumps novels by R.L. Stine. Being the really dramatic goth/emo/punk teenagers we were at the time, we really wished something interesting, meaning scary, could happen in our own lives. How stupid of me. My best friend and I somehow got into a friendship group of all guys, all around 16 to 18 from the next town over. They were really nice and we had lots of fun every time we met, like once or twice a week and on the weekends. For this story, only Dick and Stuart are relevant. Dick was a tall blonde guy that had ADHD, was a weapon enthusiast, and drove a Vespa around town. Stu was more of the shy and quiet types, and we were good friends for a brief time. This all happened over the age of MSN and MySpace, so a lot of contact was held over chats. When my best friend and I first started hanging out with this group of guys, everything was alright. Being not very girly ourselves, I think we were seen as one of the guys pretty quickly, instead of being somebody's girlfriend anytime soon. But over the time of summer, Dick and I got really close, and before the school started again, he confessed that he really liked me. I wasn't into him at first, but being a teenager overflowing with hormones, one thing led to another, and we ended up dating within the week. He was my first real boyfriend, and I was pretty excited at first. Our romance only lasted a week though, and the aftermath several months. To get to the point, I ended the relationship after 7 days, because he was just too intense for my liking. After 3 days of chatting a lot and making out only once at his place, he told me about a dream he had, which went something like this. I dreamed that I was meeting you in the city. When you were walking up to me, I was surprised at first because you were holding the hand of a small boy who was walking right next to you. As you were walking closer, I began to realize that he was our kid. He had my hair but your face, and your eyes especially. I was so happy and gave you to a huge hug before I woke up. Being 13, I was pretty shocked to hear something like this from my boyfriend of 3 days. After giving him an answer like, "You know I'm only 13, and not thinking about having kids right now, right?" The matter soon resolved in him saying, "Don't worry, I just wanted to tell you about this dream." And we changed the subject. A few days later, and another date at his house, he and I landed on his bed making out. At first it was harmless teenage kissing, but he soon indicated that he wanted to go full throttle. I said no, and he asked again a bit more, and then more insistently. I refused again, and he got visibly upset, and I went home and had to rethink this relationship. The next day I felt really uncomfortable chatting with him, and decided that I really was not into him at all, and rather not be in a relationship with him. We met on the weekend with our group of friends, and I took him aside and spoke to him. He was sad, but said he wanted to remain friends, to which I agreed. We hugged goodbye and we went home. I explained to the others what happened, and they all took it without further questions and we moved on. He mentioned a few times since the breakup that he was still really hung up on me, and that I should give him another chance. I explained constantly that I didn't feel this way, and he shut up about it for a few days before we spoke of it again. I don't really remember how much time passed, but it must have been a few weeks or months of this behavior. It all escalated when one day, while just casually hanging out, some other friends of the guy joined our shared group, and along with them came Stu. We all always hung out together, with nobody just having private hangouts or anything. But I assume seeing me and Stu having a good time while out with everybody, Dick started to get really jealous. His demeanor changed, and he became mad and aggressive more often than usual. He tried to talk crap about Stu behind his back to me via MSN, and all in all just really acted aggressively towards him and me. I really had nothing going on with Stu, so I was really confused and annoyed, and he would attack me verbally more often on these days. He even threatened to end it all, or me, if I wouldn't be with him. These threats upset me a lot, and I tried to talk to a school counselor about it, as I felt threatened by him, but she seemed overwhelmed by this too, and just told me to ignore him. I didn't tell my mother, and my dad was AFK since I was 8, because she and I were not having the best relationship at the time, and I kept all that stuff to myself. One fateful evening though, Dick chatted with me about Stu, and told me again that he still had feelings for me, and did not want to date anybody else. I was fed up with this by now, and told him off that it's none of his business who I date, and that I do not feel the same way about him. This argument heated up pretty quickly, as he sent me a corny message like this: "If I can't have you, nobody will." At first I cringed, but as he logged off from the messenger afterwards, I became worried. What was he up to? I was also chatting with another shared friend at the time, and asked him if Dick was just offline, as it was possible in MSN to be seen as offline, but still actually be online, and being able to chat with people. He responded, "No, he said something about getting his gun," and left. Now I was really upset. I knew that he had a rifle and a few guns at home. Now I think these might have been just air guns, but what did I know? Because as I said, he was really into weapons. But I did not know how dangerous he could be. I asked the friend if he thought Dick could be dangerous, and he replied again. He seemed pretty upset. "If I were you, I wouldn't go outside tonight." I panicked and called my best friend. She freaked out and told her parents, as mine weren't at home. I was a latchkey kid, to which her father offered to come over if I felt unsafe, and they lived right next door. I didn't want to make a scene, and told him thanks and that I'd call if I was scared. I spent the rest of the evening on the phone with my best friend, and sitting by our front window watching the street, and hoping to not hear any moped or Vespa driving by. Around 10 p.m, I saw Dick approaching our neighborhood fast on his Vespa. I screamed into the phone that he was here. Terrified, I just kept on watching the street and hoping he would leave. But Dick stopped a few houses down on a parking lot and got off his Vespa. I could not see in the dark if he had a gun or rifle with him, but I was scared nonetheless. For a few minutes nothing happened. He just waited there and seemingly stared up at our house, and I was staring down at him. Then my best friend's dad came out of their house and walked up to Dick and engaged him in conversation. I later was told that he asked him to leave and to not return, that I did not want to see him ever again, and if he returned, that the police would be called. This seemed to be all it took, as Dick drove off into the night and her father returned home. I asked him later if Dick had a gun, to which he replied, "Don't worry about it." I still don't know if that was a yes or no. The whole thing was resolved pretty anticlimactically. Dick left me alone for a few days and didn't show up for a few weeks to our hangouts. My best friend and I soon moved on to another friendship group, and we all lost touch with Dick and the other guys. I've met Dick a handful of times after that, but I've always tried to avoid him and we've never spoken. I'm not superstitious at all, but I learned from this experience and never made wishes like having a more interesting life again. I was laying in bed when I was about 12 years old. I was on the verge of falling asleep when I heard what sounded like a box dropping onto hardwood floor. I thought nothing of it because this has happened to me before while on the verge of falling asleep. The second time I heard it, I knew it was real because I was wide awake. About 3 seconds later, my burglar alarm went off. I shot out of bed and ran into my mum's room and waited in the closet for the police to arrive. When they showed up, we all went downstairs and our jaws dropped. Every single cabinet in the kitchen was open. Every plate, every glass, every bowl smashed into a million pieces on the ground. We thought of it as a breaking and entering, and so did the cops, until my mother realized that every door and window was still locked and there was no sign of a break-in. You'd also think that we would have heard all the glass and smashing downstairs, but my mother turned off the burglar alarm about 50 to 20 seconds after it went off, and we heard nothing but silence. The police concluded that there were no signs of a break-in, and we had basically to go about our normal lives pretending this didn't happen. My mum put the house up for sale 4 sleepless months later. This is probably close to 10 years back. Myself and my mother were visiting her sister in the north of the country, a few hundred miles from where we lived. We had left with the intention of spending a long weekend. My aunt and her family lived close to a road unofficially called the Murder Hole. This was the name given to it by locals, as it was a frequent haunt for highwaymen. Their house was really nice, but it was literally in the middle of nowhere, at least a mile from the next house, and miles away from the nearest town or shop. As we got close to my aunt's, a huge summer storm hit, torrential rain, thunder, and lightning. The house was undergoing massive interior renovation at the time, which meant my mum and I would be spending the night crashing in the living room, as all the spare bedrooms were out of commission. The storm was so bad, the workmen actually delayed leaving until it calmed down enough for them to brave the roads. When they did leave, we spent most of the evening on the back porch, watching the storm before we turned in for the night. I crashed on the couch, while my mum took a leather divan-type sofa that was placed directly under the window that faced the driveway. Late into the night, I woke up feeling very uneasy, as if I were being watched. I opened my eyes but didn't get up. I remember a weird sensation creeping up my neck. I turned my head towards where my mum was sleeping and felt my blood chill. A black figure stood at the window, his hands up to the glass, as if he was trying to see if anyone or anything was in the room. If it wasn't for the window, he would have been able to reach out to my mum. The driveway had a very powerful light fixed on a pole at the edge of the front yard. My mum, exhausted from all the driving, was completely out, despite the figure being no more than 18 inches from her face. The figure continued to slowly scan the room, then stopped suddenly, as if he had just seen me. No light was cast into the house, so the room was completely pitch black. The storm had gotten worse, and thunder and lightning was striking frequently, as if, on cue, a lightning strike hit and lit up the inside of the living room for the briefest moment. The figure left his vantage point and started walking towards the right-hand side of the house, where there was another window, offering another view of the living room. I waited until the figure was out of sight and slid off the couch, scuttling into the doorway just off the living room and out of the view of the second window. I peeked from behind the wall and could see the figure at the second window. By this stage, I was freaked and unsure of what to do. Lightning hit again, and the figure's head snapped right to where I was hiding. I remember being almost frozen, feeling his eyes were locked onto me, even though I couldn't see them. He left the second window and headed back towards the first. I somehow managed to move, running to the stairway in the corner of the room that led up to the bedroom of Mum's aunt. I burst in and shouted that there was a man outside looking in. Once over the initial surprise of me waking them up in such a panic, the husband, a large man in his own right, jumped up, summoned his two eldest sons who were a couple of years older than me, found two cricket bats, and marched down the stairs. The rest of the family and myself followed warily. My mother, having been woken up by the commotion, met us at the bottom of the stairs, having just been passed in the hallway by her sister's half-naked husband, trotting a cricket bat and marching out into the storm. I explained what happened, but could tell my mother was equally part skeptical as she was shocked. We waited for what seemed like an eternity, in the darkness, as no one thought, or perhaps dared, to turn on a light. Mum's friend tried to reassure us that it was just a late-night traveller who had broken down or perhaps gotten lost. Her husband and son returned after a minute or two. The husband went as far as to get changed and check the grounds before he hopped into his car and drove the road a few miles in both directions. There was nothing. There had been no sound of a car leaving the driveway or any physical evidence of anyone being outside. This did little to reassure me, as I was unable to shake the feeling of being watched that had originally woken me. We barely managed a night's sleep before we gathered our things to set out the next morning. My mother was convinced I had imagined the whole thing and told her sister so by way of apology. This annoyed me at first, although I knew it was the most logical explanation for them, as no one else had seen the figure. Looking to forget the whole experience, I did not argue the matter. Mum went to the car wanting to get an early start on our plans for the day. I quickly popped my head into the house to say my own goodbyes and apologized for waking them up last night. Our car horn sounded, and my aunt's husband remarked my mum was getting impatient, which was unlike her. I shrugged it off, but the car horn kept blaring, with 2 long continuous beeps, and a third final one which was a bit shorter. I went to the side of the house where the car was parked. It hadn't moved, and sat with all the doors closed apart from the passenger door on the driver's side, which was wide open. It was as I got closer to the car that I saw my mum, slumped over the steering wheel. Frantically, I pulled open the door and tried to shake her awake. I found the pulse on her neck, which seemed strong, but she seemed to be completely unconscious. I pulled her out of the car and shouted for help as I carried her to the house. I set her on the same couch I slept on the night before, and with some help of her friend, tried to bring her around from what we assumed was a random fainting spell. Thankfully, she revived quite quickly, and was quite embarrassed by the fuss she felt she had caused. She didn't remember passing out, or even getting in the car. We also found her watch had somehow frozen at roughly the same time that she got into the car, and it started working again later that day. This happened very recently. My mother and I were driving down the road to the woods so that we could take our puppy for a walk and then post some letters in the village. When we were coming back, it was just starting to get dark, but there was still a good deal of light, and I could see fine without my headlights on. For reference, I live on a hill in a very rural area, and as I was driving, I was coming towards my house, which is right on the bend of the road as you come up. There are 2 brick sheds on the left as you approach, which we use, which are across from the lane of my house. There is another lane that runs up the side of my house, which is straight on as you drive up the hill. I have to park a few yards away from my house due to the limited space. So when I come home, I turn right to pass my house, drive down to the barn, and turn around and then drive back up to park besides the road, so that my car is easier to get out of the space again. It's also important to note that these roads are very rarely used by anyone who isn't a neighbor, due to the fact that I live on a private estate, and neither of these roads actually lead anywhere. Anyway, I was driving up the hill with my mum, sitting with the dog in the back, as he's a puppy and we hadn't got a cage for my car yet. I also had a bag full of logs in the boot for the wood stove. As we're coming up the hill, I see what I think is my stepdad walking from one of the sheds across the lane and to the house. When I see him, I mention to my mum that it might be better if she got out of the car right outside the house with the dog and ask my stepdad to take the logs out so that I don't have to carry it all the way up the lane to the house. But then, as we get to the house, we realize 2 things. 1, my stepdad's car is not parked outside the house where it usually is, nor is it parked anywhere else down the lane. And 2, we just saw my stepdad on the way home, finishing up some work he was doing for our landlord. So, who exactly was the person we just saw? As I'm driving down the lane to turn around and park as I usually do, I'm thinking about the person I saw, and am trying not to freak out. It was definitely a man. There was just something about his physique, tall and lanky, and the way he walked, kind of like a swagger, that just made it seem like it was a man and not a woman. He was wearing a black hoodie with the hood up, so I couldn't see his face, as well as a pair of camouflage trousers. This is not the kind of thing my stepdad would wear, not least because he actually doesn't even own any clothes like that. He's also not lanky and doesn't swagger, so it clearly could not have been him. Anyway, we get parked and walk up to the house with the dog and the wood, and then come to the door. The door is unlocked. At this point, my mother is getting very anxious, because even though she did not see the person, she's concerned because she definitely locked the door behind her. She's borderline paranoid about locking the door, even though we live in the back and beyond, so I believe she locked the door. So she thinks that we might have been mistaken, and for whatever reason my stepdad got a lift home from work and unlocked the door himself. She opens the door and calls out his name, but there's no answer. She hears a bang coming from upstairs that sounded like something was falling off the bed. She tells me to use my key to lock the door, because now it seems someone is actually in the house. I locked the door and ran over to the tool shed to grab a hammer or something. I couldn't find the light switch, so I just grabbed the Stanley knife on the table and ran back with it. My mum told me not to use it because I could get into trouble for using it on someone, even if they were burgling the house. But I was scared out of my wits and had read far too many creepy stories, so I kept it in my hand regardless. My mum phoned my stepdad and told him that there was someone in the house, and he effectively told her to stop panicking because it was unlikely. She explained that I saw someone walking out of our shed, and then she heard something upstairs. At first, he thought we had actually seen him, but he couldn't have returned by the time we got home because we passed him near our landlord's house as we were driving back. He said not to worry and that he would be back in a minute, and my mother hung up. As she unlocked the door, she told me to wait outside with the dog and that she would go investigate. I followed her inside with the wood and the dog and the knife and stood at the front of the stairs as she went to look up. I checked the cupboard and the corner of the dining area and found nothing. Once she came downstairs and found nothing, we relaxed a bit, or she did. I was still freaked out because I had no idea what I had just seen. I too went upstairs to double check. I looked under the beds and in the cupboards, but it was to no avail. I was still freaked out though. I definitely saw someone. So considering it wasn't my stepdad, there were only a few possibilities now. One of my neighbors came over, went into our shed and disappeared into thin air. That must be the case, because they can't access it via their property on the road. I'd just driven down and saw nobody. Or our other neighbor's son who has schizophrenia. He used to be in the army and also wears camo sometimes, and he has a history of wandering around our neighbor's yard and following my neighbor around. Maybe he decided to go into our shed. This was later ruled out when my stepdad got back, because he told us that he knew my neighbor's son was now living in a home for the mentally ill just down the coast. Also, this neighbor's house is at the end of the same street I'd just driven down, so I would have seen him walking down the lane as I drove past to that neighbor's house, turned around and drove back up to park, and I didn't see him or anyone else for that matter. The only explanation is that someone came looking for my stepdad and then walked off somewhere we couldn't see. But I don't know, that'd be really weird. The only road used frequently is the one I drive down. The one other road, which was very rocky and unpaved, that leads to the barn, there's literally nothing at. So I don't know why anyone would go down there. Also, I could see right down this road when I was coming up the hill, and that person literally just disappeared behind my mum's car, where the front door is. As for the bang my mum heard, I honestly think that was just the cat jumping off my bed upstairs. But in the moment it was scary, because I'd also seen someone walking across the lane to the house, and the adrenaline was pumping. I really don't know what it was. I do know the figure was solid enough for me to think it was an actual person. I also know this isn't the first time we have seen and heard unexplainable things in our house. 2 days after we moved in, my mum and I both heard what sounded like my voice downstairs saying, "Oh, what?" And we both thought that the other had said it. I don't sound like my mum at all, really. But when you hear a female voice, your brain kind of makes sense of it and assumes it's the only other person it could be, which in my case was my mum. It was only after I found out that it wasn't my mum that I thought back to the sound and realized it really sounded more like my own voice than hers. My mum has also seen a very solid-looking cat, a totally different coloured one to R2, walking up to the door as if it was going to go out the cat flap, and then no cat flap sound. When she went to look, the cat was not there, or outside, and both our cats were still upstairs. She's also seen a small white dog appear out of nowhere and seemingly disappear, and saw someone's arms pulling out the drawers of her dresser when she was outside looking into the bedroom window. She assumed it was my stepdad, only for him to tell her that he hadn't even got out of bed yet. What creeps me out about this one is that my stepdad's workmate has seen someone walking out of our shed before too. He came to pick him up for work one time and was waiting by the house when he saw what he thought was my stepdad come out of the shed, walk through the gates beside it, and disappear behind the building. When my stepdad then walked out of the house, he was obviously pretty surprised. I've had many encounters with ghosts, but this is the first time I've seen a solid apparition in this place. Considering that the house is probably about 400 to 500 years old, I guess it's not that weird. Plus, there's a story of a former resident who was a gameskeeper, having shot himself a few decades ago, which would explain some stuff, like maybe the camo trousers. I'm not sure, but I'm really freaked out. This story happened to my dad in the late 80s. His sister used to live in New Orleans, Louisiana, and my dad was down there to visit her. One day she was busy, so he decided to occupy himself for a few hours until she was available. He went to the French Quarter to check it out, having never been before. He happened upon what he described as a little voodoo store. He walked in and immediately didn't feel right. The floor was hot. The floorboards were made of wood, which were older and a little warped, probably from being mopped often, and otherwise seemed normal, except they were hot. At the back of the store, which was filled with all kinds of weird knickknacks and things you'd pretty much expect to be associated with a voodoo-oriented place, like bones and tinctures and feathers and other things, there was an old lady sitting by herself. He assumes she was the shop owner or attendant. She got his attention when she simply said, "Hello, Michael." That's my dad's name. He looks at her and tries to respond. She was obviously blind. Both eyes were completely cloudy and milky white. He didn't say anything. He just noped the hell out of there and left. I used to work for the DNC in Yosemite National Park, and I lived with my boyfriend at the time in one of the employee tent cabins by the stables. They don't like to put non-stable employees over there because the trees aren't maintained like they are in Huff or Boys Town, and it's just a much smaller area. But we complained so much about the constant partying in Huff that they stuck us over there in Tent 13B. 13B was a rebuild of Tent 13, which had been crushed by a tree the year before. My boss at the lodge told me this story about him being one of the first responders out there when it happened. During the evening, a ton of snow fell, piling up several feet in just an hour or two. Then during the night, the temperature raised, and all the snow began to melt. Which doesn't sound like a problem, except that all the snow weighing down on the branches of these huge trees starts cascading down and bringing other, larger branches with it. Sometimes the weight will bring the entire tree down, since root systems are shallow. The kid who lived in tent 13 was sleeping during all of this, and one of these weighted trees fell, crushing part of the employee kitchen, bathroom, and finally across the middle of his body as he was laying in bed. My boss told me that when they came to the scene, his body was purple and his eyes had popped out of their sockets. It cut him in half, effectively. That scene really haunted me, especially knowing we lived in the same spot. The kid was only 27 at the time, which was the age I am now. He hated working for the DNC, like me, and he was slated to leave the park for the high country the very next day. On Christmas Eve, we were all packed up to leave the park the next day for good, since we had both quit the job. That evening, a ton of snow dumped into the valley. Several feet of snow accumulated in just an hour or two. Then at night, it warmed up, and branches started falling. My boyfriend had drank himself into a coma, and even slapping him in the face had no effect. Tent cabins are made of canvas, and you can't see out, so the sound of huge branches breaking off all around is extra terrifying. It sounded like actual bombs going off, hitting our roof and other cabins. If you've never heard a tree breaking and falling, don't worry, it's unmistakable. I didn't feel like going into the employee kitchen would be safer, since it had been crushed last year too. So I just laid in bed listening all night. At one point right behind the tent, I heard a tree break at the base. I braced myself for the end, and I could hear it was about to fall. And then with this huge thud, it fell right behind our tent and ended up destroying one of the stable fences. Obviously we were okay, but I have never been more scared in my life. It was a night of absolute horror, and knowing there was nothing more I could do about it. Yosemite is a powerful, wonderful place, but I'm glad that I don't live there anymore. This story happened when I was 20. I had just left university and never been in a serious relationship. Enter Brad. Brad was a charming and lovely fellow. We went on a few dates, and me being very naive made me think that he was perfect and the one. We hung out a whole load together and started to move our relationship to the next level, and I was very excited to see how things progressed with him. We were even talking about moving in not 3 months into our relationship. Then he started asking me weird questions about my finances. He wanted us to get a joint account. More importantly though, he wanted his name on my account, but refused to do the same for his, saying that he didn't earn anywhere near as much as me, and that if I loved him, we should be willing to share everything from now. I was actually buying into his bull, and I started the process of adding him to my accounts. And then I got an anonymous Facebook message from a girl. I can't remember the name, but she just sent me a few words and some pictures. She explained that he was his girlfriend, and that they had a baby together. The baby was very cute, and that he would take time out to go and work when actually he would be with me. I was absolutely disgusted. I think that he was just trying to take me for a fool and steal my money. I instantly blocked him and was so glad I didn't add him to any of my accounts, because I know if that message had not come in any sooner, would he have probably robbed me and left me, or who knows, he may have just played me and strung me along. I was very happy I found out when I did, but it put me off dating for a very long time, and I don't know if I'll ever be ready to take the plunge again. Nonetheless, I hope to never meet him again. When I was 8, my grandma came to visit and slept in the spare room. I had gotten up early one morning, and we went with one of my brothers and laid in bed with Grandma to talk. I then asked if she saw the shadow at the end of the bed. She told us both that she could. Then my grandma crawled to the end of the bed, and the shadow melted into the ground. We still talk about this almost 30 years later. I also used to live a block away from a cemetery, and I saw a lot of strange stuff. I would see people in the cemetery, and then something would block my view and they would be gone when I'd look again. This happened more times than I could count. There was another night that the cemetery was completely black. No light shined from it, and when my headlights on my car shined in, they didn't work. I thought that they were off, but they came on automatically. I tried shining my high beams, and you still couldn't see. There was another occasion where I could see dark ghosts, for lack of a better term, flying at a single grave, and they would just melt into a giant ball of black atop of the grave. It was very creepy. I also had to drive by 3 churches to get to and from work, and one day on my way home, I saw 3 extremely tall figures in all white gliding down the sidewalk. As I drove closer, they faded into nothing. I also lived in a house that an old lady died in. My dog would sit in one corner of a bedroom and act like he was being petted. That same corner of the room would always have all the toys pushed out of it, as if my kids left them there. It was a nice ghost though. When I was younger, I would always see a silhouette of a man in the main hallway of my childhood home. He would stand outside on my bedroom and watch over me. My brother also saw him. Those were the ones that always came to mind when I talk about ghosts and paranormal stuff. It's all kind of normalized for me, since I've experienced it most of my life. I'll see things that others don't, or I'll notice my stuff has moved, as I'm very organized and I have lived alone for a while. Maybe I'll notice my dogs are acting weird in the same areas that I get weird feelings from. I don't really believe in the paranormal. I think there was probably an explanation, but I was too young to know what it was. I'm going to tell the story as I remember it. My room wasn't very large, a typical square room, mostly taken up by a dresser, bookshelf/TV stand combo, and my twin-sized bed. The bed bisected the room, separating the entrance door from the sliding closet door. As I was young, I'd like to have the fan on. I had one of those long extendo chains for the light, so I could turn off my light and still enjoy the fan at nights. I was in my room messing around not long before bed. I've always been an active person, and in my childhood, I was never anywhere in the house without a trusty toy sword or toy sword stand-in at close hand, and tonight was no exception. I don't remember why I swung, because again, small room, but I swung my sword and it struck the long chain for the light. Anywho, whoever has accidentally whacked their chain knows what happened next. The chain goes flying into the air, wraps itself endlessly around the light fixture, and turns off the light. In an instant, I was plunged into darkness. Annoyed, I clambered onto my bed and began to tentatively reach up. I didn't want to stick my hand in the fan blade, but I needed to reach really close in order to begin untangling the chain. I froze when I heard a shuffling sound and then a groan. It sounded close by in my room with me. It sounded like the closet door was sliding open on its old track. I kept trying to reach up, but now the hair on my arm was standing on end. The groan of the door finally stopped, but what replaced it was a heavy, throaty breathing. I imagined it? Of course. I had to have, because what little boy doesn't have an overactive imagination? But all the same, I was terrified. I gave up trying to untangle the light chain and instead reached for the top of it, where the chain fed directly into the light fixture. The breathing was closer now, and my brain was happy to provide the loudest sounds and the horrifying images of everything they belonged to creeping towards my bed. I found the chain, and I pulled. I know I pulled. I heard the click, but perhaps I just wanted to, because the light did not flood the room and banish away the darkness of my fears. I pulled again and again. Surely the chain was just too tightly wound to activate the light. Of course it was. I couldn't wait to find out. I dove off my bed and lunged for the door to my bedroom, flung it open and allowed the light from the hallway to spill into the room. I whirled around, toy sword still in hand, but there was nothing there. The gloom of my bedroom stared back at me. Bed, dresser, bookcase with my TV and Xbox perched atop, and no monsters. I re-entered my room and climbed onto the bed once more, reached up, and with the aid of the hall light pulled firmly on the base of the light string. With a loud click, the light turned on, and my bedroom returned to normal. I unwound the light chain from the light fixture and climbed off the bed, sunspots dancing in my eyes from looking at the light and feeling a little woozy from the past minute. But it was okay. It was all in my imagination. There was no monster. The light wasn't turning on because I was pulling it wrong. I could explain everything very easily. Except for why my closet door was open. My dad and I had been hiking out in Colorado, and on this day we were doing the Shavano-Tabiguache pair, which to anyone accustomed to climbing 14ers know isn't very difficult, just a fun day hike. As the sun came up, we noticed it was completely cloud covered, but figured they'd all burn off in a few hours. As the day goes on, we summit both peaks and are coming back to Shavano completely engulfed in the sheet of clouds. Visibility was a good 10 feet max. Now I say the difficulty isn't bad, but as we're making our way down Shavano, back to the tree line, we ended up coming down the opposite side of the mountain. Now we make it down about 2,000 feet before we notice something's wrong. Just then, the clouds decide it was time to start pouring on us, with the fog only getting worse. As we come down further, the incline starts getting relatively steep, and we decide the best move is to turn around and go back up the saddle and cross back into the valley we came up on, which is a very stupid decision. We make it about 1,000 feet back up, and we still can't see the top anywhere in sight. And the several ton boulders we've been climbing up are hella slick and are starting to shift with all the rain. Still pouring, I finally decide it's time to try and call search and rescue. After spending 30 minutes trying to get a signal, we manage to get a hold of them, and they say that all that we can do is go all the way down to the valley and hike through the woods for several miles until we run into the Colorado Trail. They had no way of reaching us. At this point I tell my dad, at least there's no lightning. And just like that, a few hundred feet away strikes the first bolt, and from then on, we're in a full-on thunderstorm, 1,500 feet above the tree line on the side of the mountain. So we freak the hell out and start running down the mountain, not caring about slipping or falling. We managed to make it down to Shivano Lake without making any more than a few scrapes and bruises, and we think, hell yeah, we did it. It was just a quick walk in the woods back to camp. And I'm not going to go much more into detail, but the woods we ended up walking in were another 5 hours in the pouring rain / near freezing. I'll never forget how good the shower felt that night. This story happened to my mostly skeptical sister. They had an old TV, not flat screen, which would pop up a message at the top when it was turned on or off. You could program what it would say, but it was hello and goodbye by default, and they had never changed the message. They were living in a very old house in historical Stonington, Connecticut. Not one of the big, nice houses in the main part of the village. They lived in a sort of poor people house off the side on the edge of town, old enough to have cloth around the wiring instead of modern plastic and horsehair plaster. She never really liked that place, but it was what they could afford. A few times, she and her boyfriend were sitting in the living room and talking while the TV was on. Every once in a while, the TV would display a message like it did when it turned on or off, but it wasn't hello or goodbye. It would say things related to what they were talking about, like, that's true, or would say something like, phone will ring, right before the phone rang. My sister and her boyfriend would pretty much leave the room when that happened. They got rid of the TV as soon as they could. From what they remember, she said that it also happened in the next house they moved into, but I'm not entirely sure about that. This happened about 5 years ago. I had just started a new job at a bank that I don't wish to name. And my trainer was a really nice guy. We got on really well, and through whatever reason, the other person that was supposed to be joining me on the training, who'd also got the same job as me, didn't actually turn up, so it was just me and him. We got on really well. He was funny, charming, and seemed to really like me. He started touching me gently, caressing my arms from time to time when I did something well, and I honestly enjoyed the attention. But I knew it was slightly inappropriate. Now, at my job, we have this messenger system that we use internally, and we'd always be chatting about non-related work stuff on there. There were times I was caught giggling in my cubicle and was worried that my manager would start asking questions or check my IT history, as they could do that. It wasn't before long that he asked me out, and I giddily accepted. It was only when we started having a romantic relationship did I realize how much of a creep he was. He was into some pretty hardcore BDSM stuff, something I have no interest in, and on the first date was very explicit on how he wanted to do these things on me. Yeah, not the best thing to say on a first date, as it was an instant turn-off. That, along with a whole load of other things, really started giving me bad vibes, especially when he asked if when I was younger, if I ever liked hurting animals, as when he was, he'd always loved to take his grandfather's shotgun and try to shoot bunnies. He made a point to say, especially the baby ones, they're slower. Yeah, our date didn't last very long, and I faked that my crab wasn't very good, gave me a stomach upset, and got a taxi home. When I got back to the office the next day, I tried my best to cease all conversations with him, and made up some lame excuse about my manager tracking my internet activity and me needing to act more professionally. He wasn't very happy with this, and that's when the stalking started. He'd start following me to the bathroom to try and talk to me. He'd take his breaks at the same time as me, try to sit on the same table, and when I would run errands around town, he'd come out and try to talk to me on the way. I was getting very uncomfortable, and it was not pleasant at all. To cut a long story short, I ended up telling my manager everything, and the next day when I got to work, he wasn't there. Turns out I wasn't the only girl he tried this to, and they were fed up. He was fired, and I'm glad I never got to see him again. I hope I never have to again. I live in a very old house, and I have lived here since I was 4. I'm 22 now. A lot of strange occurrences have happened here, the main one being that I woke up in the very early hours of the morning to see a young boy messing about with the sink that I had in my room at the time. He wasn't looking at me. He seemed almost not there, but I could see him. When I managed to pluck up the courage to go and see my parents, I left him in my room. My parents were very understanding. Turns out years later, when they told my sister and me we had quite a few spirits in the house, and I described this lad to them, as they had seen him and knew I wasn't making it up. There was always singing in the house too. Never an actual source, just humming and singing floating around. My sister and mother and I had things go missing, turned up in a room, and on return, her diary, which had gone missing a few days earlier, was just sitting on the middle of the floor despite not being there mere moments ago. A lot of this I was too young to understand, but when my parents sat us down and told me everything, it scared the crap out of me for a good while. We still have random unexplained things happen to us, but we can just talk about it and wonder who or what it could be. The calm before the storm is real. One time that will stick with me is when I was fishing with my dad. It was a pretty rubbish day, and after a while we could see some pretty mean-looking storm clouds off in the distance. All of a sudden everything got quiet. No more birds, no more wind. It was extreme quiet. The lake surface was smooth, and we stopped drifting. We continued to fish for a few minutes when my dad froze and said, "Hey, do you hear that?" I stopped moving and listened. I did hear something, a faint rustling sound that was slowly growing in volume. My dad, as he is quite the outdoorsman and has most likely experienced this before, pointed to the far shore and said, "It's the wind." I looked in the direction he pointed, and I could see the wind. Or more, I could see the effects. A line of disturbed water was moving towards us from the shore, and everything behind it was being whipped around. Trees would get hit by the line and all of a sudden look as if they were in a storm. The rustling grew in intensity as the line approached us. Still utterly calm where we were, my dad and I watched. This line of chaos raced towards us, and when it hit, it was night and day. A wall of air slammed into us, causing us to physically recoil, and we were instantly in a storm. At least no rain was present yet. The wind howling around our ears made the low rustling sound immediately transform into a harsh, continuous blast. Communication went from quiet voices to yelling towards each other. My dad yelled to me that we were leaving before it got any worse, and so we hightailed it off to the lake as it began to turn into angry seas. Fun times. I am a mail carrier for the postal service. The route I am currently assigned to is a very rural route. Some of the homes are miles apart. A lot of farmland and cattle. This one particular home I deliver to has been on vacation mail hold for about a month. When the date of the hold was up, I delivered their mail per protocol. Well, 2.5 weeks have gone by, and no one had emptied the mailbox. Keep in mind, this is a very small town, and I am only one of 3 employees at the post office. I asked the clerk if they had maybe called about holding their mail longer, and I had just not got the memo. She then related to me something that happened around this time last year. Apparently, this time last year, the wife took a restraining and protection order out against her husband and disappeared for a few months. When the mail hold was over, it was another 2 months before the husband came into the office to get his mail. The wife soon returned to the home, but she is hardly ever seen. The clerk said that she thought the husband had killed the wife or something like that. Well, as of early February, when their mail went on hold, both of them were alive and well. The clerk told me what kind of vehicle the man drives, and that he is always towing a camper. I decided to drive down the long gravel lane, away from the main road and their mailbox, to their house. I just wanted to see if anyone was home and asked them to please empty their mailbox if they wanted to continue to get mail. As I drove up, I just got the weirdest vibe from the house. There was no truck or camper and no other cars. I pulled up to the very large 2-story plantation-style home, something that isn't very common where I live. I shut off my truck, and today was a fairly warm spring day, and I'd heard birds and cattle and horses all day long. Here in the driveway, there was nothing but silence. It was so heavy. It took me a few seconds to gather myself and actually get out of the truck. I'm not usually a scaredy cat, but there is something seriously unsettling about that house. I walked to the door just in case someone was home and knocked. I had a feeling that there was no one home, but I just wanted to cover all of my bases before making a work-related decision. When no one answered, I rang the doorbell for good measure and listened. It was deafeningly quiet, and then I heard a noise. It sounded like someone was tapping on the glass of the window in the door. I was looking right at it though, and there was nothing there and no one in the house that I could see. I quickly walked back to my truck and got the hell out of there. As I was tearing back down the driveway, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw a woman in the 2nd-story window above the front door. I about started crying. I am not an emotional person. I don't know what the hell happened today. I've been thinking about it almost all day. I just can't shake the feeling that something is wrong. I also called the police and was informed that the home and property are vacant. The wife left and is staying on the other side of the country with family, keeping her exact location confidential so that the husband doesn't try to contact or go after her. The husband cannot be within a certain distance to the home and is currently staying at a campground 50 miles away in his trailer. Seems to be just a repeat of last year. But then who the hell was that woman on the window? A few years ago, I was down on my luck in the relationship scene. My girlfriend of 3 years had just broken up with me because she had started dating her boss, and I came to find out that it had been going on for the last 2 years. Isn't that just peachy? Anyway, I joined Tinder, something I'm not proud of, and I tried to connect with a whole bunch of girls, in the hopes that I can at least find someone decent while I'm feeling down. Don't get me wrong, I'm not looking for a quick hookup, but I really wanted someone to fill that void from the previous relationship. I wanted someone to love. That's when I connected with Kimberly. She seemed very nice during the messages, and we lived very close to each other, too close in fact. And we agreed to meet up at a local restaurant a week ahead. I was getting very excited. We were always messaging, and within a very short space of time, it started to feel really serious. We went on our date and got on very well. And before long she started telling me that she loved me. Now I'm not sure how other people feel about this, but to me it's a very big deal to admit this, and I certainly wasn't in a position to say it back to her, something which she took very badly. She asked why I didn't say it back, and me being the straight up guy told her that I just wasn't feeling the same way, but that if she would let our relationship grow and nurture, I'm sure that in time I'd feel the same way, and that people move on at different rates and yada yada. She was very unhappy, but in her credit, tried her best to not make me feel uncomfortable, and we carried on with our date that night. A few weeks later, things had heated up a bit more. We were moving on into the next level, if you know what I mean, and she ended up staying over at my place that night. I woke up at about 3 a.m. to use the toilet, and when I look, she's not in bed with me. Now, this being the first time we've done the nasties, I wondered if she'd just gone home. I wasn't entirely sure of the parameters of this with her. So, I look around, and she's nowhere to be seen on the top floor. I go down the stairs, and the smell of fire catches my nostrils. I look outside into my garden, and she's taken this metal bin and started a fire. I run up to her and ask her what the hell she's doing, and she is burning loads of my things. She looks at me with this cold, dead stare and says, "You can't have any of this. That's why you don't love me. Because you keep things that she gave you in the house." I was absolutely horrified. I don't even know where she made this assumption from. Things like my CDs, DVDs, hell, even my iPhone, and a whole bunch of other stuff were now melting away in this fire. I was horrified, and I told her that she needed to go and that I was calling the police and the fire department. The fire was put out pretty quickly, and I never spoke to her again. She definitely had several screws loose, and I hope that no other man falls for her madness. To fully appreciate the background of this story, I need to give you information regarding where I lived. You see, we were in a temporary living situation. Our house had burnt to the ground, and we'd lost everything. But fortunately my parents had insurance, and they put us up in a temporary living situation. I had my own room, as the only child, and my parents had a different room. I was about 15 at the time, and that place always gave me the creeps. For real. I don't think a day would go by where I found myself in that area, where I wouldn't be terrified. The place itself wasn't too bad, but the situation and location weren't the best. But still, we knew it wouldn't last forever, so we didn't get too comfortable. Except for maybe in one aspect. You see, the clerk, or admin guy, who worked behind the counter of this motel, was quite nice, and whenever I'd get back from school, he'd always be on shift and try to strike up a conversation with me. Now, because we're living in a motel, he obviously has the key and can go into our room, which I personally find a bit creepy. So I started putting the do not disturb signs up, but my parents kept telling me to take it off, because otherwise our room wouldn't be cleaned, which, to be fair, was necessary. A few weeks pass, and I'm still not feeling good. There's just something about this place that gives me the creeps. Every morning, I also get some free complimentary breakfast before I have to go to school. I remember this was a Wednesday. I tended to rush my homework in the morning, grab a few bits to eat, and plow through everything I possibly could. and think up excuses if I don't have enough time to finish. Now, the way this is set out is that the banqueting hall is right after the front desk, and from where I was sitting, I had a clear view of where the creeper guy was. So he gets a guest, they come and talk to him, and shortly after they leave, he leaves as well. I just assume it was something related to that family, and that his business was needed elsewhere. But I was wrong. I never saw him return, and when I went back up to my room, in order to just finish grabbing the rest of my books, did I get a very uncomfortable feeling. I stayed quiet for a minute, and could have sworn I heard breathing coming from the closet. It was the first time in my life that I felt true fear, and panic was engulfing me. I stood there stunned, unsure of what my next move should be. I looked at my wristwatch and noticed that time was running out, and that if I didn't leave soon, I wouldn't be able to make it to school on time and catch my bus. So, full of trepidation, did I creep forward to the closet and swing open the door, only to be met with this strange guy. I jumped, let out an audible scream, and he let out a scream as well. I was furious. I wasn't sure what he was doing in the room, but I was very, very upset. I scream for my parents, who come in from the other room, and yell at the guy, who is still in the closet, as he hadn't come out yet. My dad starts yelling at him, asking what the hell he's doing spying on a 14-year-old girl, to which he has no reply. After about 10 minutes of an onslaught of words from my father, does he get up from his crouched position, apologize, and walk back to the front desk, this time with a queue lagging behind. My dad tells me to go to school, so I do, and when I get back, the guy is gone. He never came back to work, and my dad refused to tell me what went down that day. But I have a good idea that my dad gave him more than a piece of his mind. So creepy peeping Tom, who was in my closet, let's not meet again. And I really hope you didn't see more than I wanted you to, weirdo. When I was 6 years old, my father, who was in the United States Air Force, was stationed in Upper Hayford in the UK. We lived in a village in Warwickshire in a 150-year-old house that had very old wooden floors that were uneven and would creak with every step. One day I had a friend over, and we thought to go upstairs to my room and play. My room was the first room along a hallway at the end of the stairs. The other rooms on the hallway were for storage, and at the end of the hall, a stairway that led up to the attic. My friend and I took turns rolling my Hot Wheels and Matchbox cars down the hallway outside my room towards the stairs to the attic. Because the floors were uneven, the cars would go about 3/4 of the way down the hall. We kept going into my room to find more toys that we could roll down the hall, and came across a toy motorcycle about the size of an adult's hand that had square-edged tires, so it was capable of standing by itself. When we rolled it down the hall, it went all the way down to where the attic stairs were, and toppled over on its side. We went into my room again to find more cars, and when we got back into the hallway, I looked to the end of the hall and saw the motorcycle. It was standing straight up facing towards my room. I asked my friend if he saw it fall, and he confirmed that he saw it fall down, and that it had been facing the attic stairs. He had been with me the whole time looking for cars to roll down the hall, so I know he didn't move the motorcycle. I called my mum to see if she was there, and she responded from downstairs. My dad was still at the Air Force Base. If she or anyone had come up the stairs, we would have heard them as the floors creak. Our dog was downstairs with her, and if he'd have come up, I could have heard his nails clicking on the wooden floor. To this day, 40 years later, I have no explanation for how the toy that was on its side turned upright and reversed without making a sound. I went cruising around in Hurricane Sandy. I enjoy going out in bad weather for some reason, as it's a cheap thrill. But I saw the number of trees down and leaves everywhere. It quickly went from this is cool to holy crap, it's a really dumb decision and I could die. I drove 20 minutes to find my friend's house at 3 or 4 a.m, only to turn around when her mother wouldn't let her out the house. I drove around in the next hurricane too. My friend's girlfriend and I went to get cigarettes, and while I was creeping down a road with my head out the window looking at a fallen tree, a downed power line smacked right off the windshield in front of my face. I saw it out the corner of my eye at the last second, as this dark shape rushing at my face, and I let out a little scream that I claimed was fully masculine, and she claims was the scream of a little girl. I also tried walking to a gas station for fun in the middle of a 36-inch blizzard in 2013. I made it about 60 yards before I imagined getting stuck and killed by a plow and turned around. My mum and dad split up when I was about 2. My dad eventually ended up with his current wife, my stepmother, and they moved quite far away. Me and my older brother Bob would go up and see him once a month. When he first moved away, he lived in this big house that was set out really odd. You'd enter the house into a tiny hallway, with the front room on the right, a dining room to the left. You'd walk through the dining room to the kitchen, which had the back door to the garden, as well as having the bathroom and toilet attached to the kitchen. Super weird. Upstairs was my dad's bedroom to the right, above the front room, and to the left was a really long hallway. About halfway down the hallway was my brother's room. To the left, if you were just walking down the hallway, and at the end, you came face to face with the door to my room. So, the story goes that the place was haunted. I was reasonably young, about 11 or 12. They didn't want to tell me about it because they thought I'd get scared, which I understand. I found out later of the things that had happened to them whilst in the home. My stepmother had an incident where she was in her bedroom doing her hair in the mirror. She looked up in the mirror and saw a young girl standing behind her with her arms crossed over her chest. My stepmother squealed, closed her eyes, and put her head in her hands. And when she looked up, the girl was gone. There were plenty of other instances of doors opening and closing, footsteps up and down the long hall, knocking about in the attic as well as the dogs acting strange, and we had 2 huge Rottweilers. One day I was staying the weekend, and I felt really sick. My family had made plans to go out, but I didn't feel up for it. They decided to leave me at home on my dad's PC in the care of the dogs. They didn't want to let me be alone, in case something happened. While I was playing on the PC, the dogs went really weird. They were normally quite docile, really friendly and extremely loving. Well, they started running about the front room barking. Every once in a while, they would stop and just aggressively growl at the fireplace. I stopped and tried to calm them down, but as I knelt next to them, one of them turned and bit me on the face. He was immediately apologetic, licking and whimpering, whilst asking for cuddles, but I was scared and hurting a bit. He didn't even break the skin, so it wasn't a bad bite, and I felt like I was going to puke. I ran to the bathroom, and the family got home. I told them what happened and they looked really concerned, but told me not to worry and to keep an eye on us. A little something about my room. It was dark and really small. It had a tiny window as well as 2 huge wardrobes in the corner. I never really felt comfy in that room. I hated being able to see the bedroom door, and I have no idea why. I often read in bed, and then try to sleep on the floor, which is really odd now that I think back on it. I couldn't get comfy on that bed, and always had an impending feeling of unsafe. Later that night, we all went to bed. Now, I like to read before going to sleep, so I was reading to myself, as I was slowly drifting off to sleep, when the bedroom started screaming. I know that sounds bizarre, but there was just this insanely loud scream coming from the room. I had no idea what was going on, so I immediately panicked. Who wouldn't? I tried to open my door, and it wouldn't budge. I could hear my brother on the other side of the door also trying to open it, but I couldn't make out what he was saying. The scream was just too loud. I heard thumps outside the door, and I had no clue what was happening and just kept trying to open the door whilst crying. Suddenly the screaming stopped, and the door opened. My brother, dad, and stepmother were just standing there staring at me. I was sobbing, and my brother hugged me, and my dad asked me why I was screaming and whether I saw the girl. I said I wasn't, and my brother confirmed that he could hear me saying, "What?" throughout the screaming. I stayed in my brother's room that night. The next time I went to my dad's, he had moved homes. I heard the other stories years later. I'd hear other stories about the fireplace being pulled out and things being found. But to be honest, they sounded a bit far-fetched to me. I know this story might sound it too, but I know it happened because I lived it. I met this friend online the summer before my junior year of high school. I was 16. His name was Flip. We clicked pretty instantly. Our senses of humor matched up, and I felt like we were really good friends. He was a guy, I a girl, but I never held any romantic feelings. Also, I was in a relationship. When I was 16, he was 19. I could tell he had romantic feelings, and let me know 6 months into our friendship that he loved me. We didn't really have a stable friendship, as he flipped out a lot and would go on extended amounts of time without talking to me. He told me it was because he couldn't bear to talk to me knowing we can't be together, because I was dating someone else. But I knew that it was more of a control thing, and he wanted to stop talking to me to make me feel like I'm missing something. He really hated women, really, really disliked women, and felt like most were just users. He told me he felt like I was different, that I was the only true woman he's ever met. Real red flag right there. I was young and didn't really think much of it. Our friendship was only online, instant messaging and FaceTiming. Now when we went on these tangents where he would abruptly stop talking to me, he would go on Twitter and make offensive, demonizing tweets about me to people, like awful stuff. When he came back, I just ignored that stuff, because he would return being funny and nice. So, he also had a habit of lashing out on people, taking revenge and just making people feel crappy for fun. Another red flag. But I thought I was special, and that he really cared about me and would never do anything like that to me. I remember leading up to my 18th birthday, with him being 21 now, and he said to me, "When you're 18, you're sending me nudes. You don't get to say no." I brushed it off because I knew I wouldn't. But yeah, notice there's just this element of him wanting to dominate. Fast forward 2 years later. I'm now 18, freshman in college. In October, I broke up with my boyfriend, the same guy as age 16, and Flip took that as an opportunity. He would tell me how he could not bear not seeing me, and that basically We have to meet or it's all over. Now, I didn't really have romantic feelings for him. My love for him was platonic, but I figured I'll try the romance. I'll try to love him romantically. I couldn't lose him. So I impulsively bought a plane ticket to where he lives in December. My parents had no idea, and to this day, still don't. I was going to go away on a Friday and return for Monday. The college I go to is in a city with an airport, so it was just easy to get an Uber there. This romance that I'm trying to project feels real, and I genuinely felt like I loved him romantically. I was finally going to meet the guy I loved. Now, leading up to the flight, about a week or two before, I started getting cold feet. I was questioning the legitimacy of my feelings, and started getting on with a guy in a neighboring uni. I started catching feelings for him, and kissed him a day before my flight. At that point, I had already decided I didn't want to pursue Flip romantically, and figured, hey, we've been friends for 2 years. When I get there, I'll tell him I only want to stay friends. Yeah, he'll be upset, but I'm sure our friendship is worth more than that, and we're able to have a nice, enjoyable time. How naive was I? I decided to go on the trip anyway, thinking that maybe seeing him would reignite that fire. Upon arrival, I realized that I did not love him, and I was no longer attracted to him. Regardless though, he was a close friend of mine for a very long time, and whether I felt a romantic connection or not, I wanted to meet him for the sake of meeting him, just how I would for any internet friend. So it's time for the flight. It's very early. I remember sitting on the plane contemplating walking out. I really just wanted to leave and not return. I should have listened to my gut. I arrive, and I go outside of the terminal. I see him sitting in his car just staring at me, like a very malicious, piercing stare. After a few moments, he gets out the car. He looks different. It's strange because we have FaceTimed and I've seen pictures of him, but he just looks different. Kind of creepier. We hug and sit in the car. It's awkward. I feel awkward. We make small talk and awkward jokes, and in that moment, I wanted to be back in my dorm. We go back to his apartment, and we go up to his room. We smoke some weed, and I lay down on his bed. When I wake up, he's spooning me and trying to fondle me. I take his hands off and tell him to stop. Then I sit up and basically unload about how I don't want him romantically, but only as a friend. He just started crying and begging me to tell him that I loved him. I tell him that I can't do that. And then he stands up, stops crying, goes to the bathroom, and starts setting things on fire. It smells like burning paper in the bedroom now. He comes out normally and just sits on his computer and plays games without speaking to me. Now, the rest of the trip is just a combination of him being kind and normal to him being completely evil. Here's some of the things he did and said through the 3 days. He made jokes at me dying. He would pretend to hit me, like lunge at me, and get close enough to watch as I flinched. Told me he almost sent a snap of me to my mum with the geotag of his town so that I would get in trouble. Told me he almost made me sleep in the car one night. Told me that one night while I was sleeping, he walked over to me and started farting on me. This one's just nasty. He kept telling me to shut up when I would speak or ask him questions, and did that multiple times in front of his roommates. He was trying to feel me up in bed, and I kept pushing his hands away, and he would keep trying and would say things like, "I know you want it, you're just holding back." He'd call me an idiot when I would ask him questions, served me spaghetti, and he purposely used the moldy sauce hoping I would get sick. Told me he was going to make me miss my flight home, and said he was planning to drive in the opposite direction of the airport and dropping me off in the middle of nowhere. So basically I kept my cool, and when he would tell me these things I would nod and agree and laugh with him. but I was scared out of my wits. I wanted nothing more than to leave, so I kind of keep it cool and spend my time trying not to upset him. Monday rolls around, and my flight isn't until 8 p.m. At 11 a.m. he goes downstairs to leave, and in that time I pack my bag and leave without him knowing. My plan of action is to run to the nearest shopping plaza and Uber to the airport from there. I wasn't about to Uber from his house. I'm almost at the end of the street, feeling free, when I feel two arms come up from behind and wrap around me. He's hugging me, mumbles something into my ear, and then he turns around and dead sprints back down the street to his apartment. I ran to the shopping plaza, called an Uber, and got it. I felt so much relief in that moment. I felt like I was free. I waited at the airport with nothing to do for 8 hours, but it was better than being there. I looked back, and I feel like an idiot. Like I should have gone to a hotel, and I should have probably left. But I'm a broke college kid, and I was already scared being there without my parents' knowledge. After I left, I blocked him on every social media outlet I have, including LinkedIn. He still tried to contact me regularly for the past 4 months, but luckily, I've never told him my address or anything, and I'd rather never meet him again. Both of my maternal grandparents died before I was born, so I've obviously never met them. When I was around 5 weeks old, I got really sick and almost died. They even had a priest come in and read me my last rites, fearing I wouldn't make it out of the NICU. I lived, but continued to have related health problems, including asthma and croup, basically waking up completely out of breath and unable to take a breath in or out. I'm the youngest by 4 years, so when my siblings went to school, it was just me and my mum. We lived in a pretty big house, and my room was upstairs and far from the staircase. My mum and friends she has had over have both told me this to be true. There have been times when I had croup as an infant, and my mum would be in the kitchen, and the cabinets would fly open, and stuff would come crashing out. She knew this was the sign to check on me. She has also heard pounding in my room, which definitely couldn't have been the suffocating infant. I just want to say thank you to my grandparents for watching over me like that. I don't think I would be here today if it weren't for their ghosts. When I was living in San Francisco, I sailed in a beer can league every Wednesday. Generally, the conditions are not so bad, and if it is, we can reduce the sail area, which is called reefing. Anyway, one evening we were faced with winds of around 25 knots, gusting up to 30. Honestly, this should have probably cancelled the race, but it was near the end of the season and people were starting to get pretty competitive. Fast forward to the race. We have rounded the furthest buoy and are heading backwards towards the finish line, when we see that another of the boats has gotten their shroud hung up on a buoy. Another boat was already rendering assistance, so we go and finish the race without incident. As we are motoring around the harbour, having our last post-cruise beer, the Coast Guard shows up with a helicopter and powerboat, sirens blazing. The boat launches and they go out to rescue the stranded racers. As people start to trickle into the clubhouse, we learned what happened. Apparently the skipper was cutting it close to the buoy like we did, right when a gust hit him. The shrouds were caught on the buoy, which ended up pulling the mast down, killing one of his crew and breaking the neck of another. The skipper walked away unscathed. There were only a few boats in our fleet, and we were all pretty close. I knew every person in the league by name. This didn't happen to me, but to my grandfather, who is a war veteran. Shortly after the Korean War, he and some of his friends had come back home and naturally celebrated their return. They lived in a very rural part of Southern California at the time, and to this day, the population is at peak, around 200 people. Anyway, my grandfather was driving home in the dead of night, with his friends piled in the car and sleeping, aside from his buddy riding shotgun. They were in the middle of the desert with nothing for miles, so it naturally should have been an easy-going ride home. My grandfather suddenly saw a strange dark figure up ahead, which looked like a person, and quickly began swerving out of the way to avoid hitting the guy. Right before he swerved, he got a better look at the person and saw he was completely draped in black robes. They pulled over after he swerved, and he did a quick double check, and the black-robed person was nowhere to be seen. The guys sleeping didn't see anything, but apparently the buddy riding shotgun saw it too. To this day, when my grandfather told me the story, he was 100% sure it was death. He didn't understand why he was there or for what, but that glimpse caught him right before he swerved, and had apparently been proof enough to make him think it had been death itself. Moving into a new house can be a daunting experience for most. Me and my sister were very anxious about our new place. My dad had just been made redundant from his job, and we couldn't afford to rent the place we were living in any longer. A friend of our dad's had a place in the forest. It was an old house, very big, but because it was out in the boonies and needed a bit of maintenance, my dad's friend was willing to give it to us very cheap, on the condition that we tried to fix it up. He was a wealthy man, so for him, I think so long as the house was maintained a little bit, it was unimportant. Nonetheless, we were a bit skeptical. We were city girls all our life, and to move to the remote countryside was a culture shock that we hadn't anticipated. However, making the most out of the situation, we tried to adapt to our new environment. One thing that we found particularly creepy were our bedrooms. Damp, dark, and uninviting. No matter how much I tried to paint the walls, add brighter light bulbs into the light fixtures, did the eerie feeling not go away, and I never really felt at home there. Anyway, that was the background. On to the story. My room was your average size room. It was square in shape. I painted the walls pink and white, and it had a closet. Now, the closet was nothing special, but I always had a strange feeling from there. Please bear in mind that this was in one of the corners of the house. My room was just always my room, and I never really felt comfortable. I always felt like I was being watched when I'd sleep. I'd sometimes wake up in a sweat or have very bad dreams repeatedly. There'd be times where I'd go sleep over at friends' houses, and this would never happen. But the moment I was asleep in my bedroom in particular, did the bad dreams and strange feelings surge. This was also true if I slept in a different room of the house, for example, crashing on the sofa. I was completely fine. I ended up using the sofa far more than I did my own room, but my parents weren't too happy about it, so I tried using the sofa less and less, as much as it jeopardized my sleep. I had just bought a whole load of things from the mall. A lot of it things I didn't really need, And upon realizing this and being far too lazy to return them, did I just add them to a box I had in the corner of the room and tell myself that it was time I put it in the cupboard or closet. So I picked up the heavy box and started pushing it towards the end of the closet. It was only then that I heard a creak and a snap. Several of the planks that had been covering up whatever was underneath had given way. My first instinct was fear, because this house, as I mentioned before, was rented to us by a family friend, and if we were damaging the property, which was the opposite of what we were supposed to be doing, my parents, and therefore me, could get into trouble. So I removed the box at once and assessed the damage. It didn't look so bad, but using the flashlight from my iPhone, was I able to identify something beneath my room. I looked, and there were some stone stairs going down that had been covered by the space that the closet occupied. I didn't know what to do with this information. Should I tell my dad, or should I explore? Now I was scared of the room, at night mostly, but during the day that feeling wasn't there, and I wondered if it had anything to do with what lay underneath my closet. So, bravely, I started pulling apart the loose and weak planks from their original position. I only needed to take off 2 or 3 more, until there was more than enough room for me to go down. So I did. I went all the way down, and it was a lot longer than I had anticipated. It felt like at least a story and a half. When I got to the bottom, it was pitch black, and there were no light switches here. I fumbled for my phone and dropped it in the dark. The flashlight was on, and it revealed a dark, little, dingy room. I kept looking around, seeing if there was anything of interest, but there didn't seem to be anything. Just as I was going back up the stairs, did I feel a cold chill run up my spine, and instinctively, I started turning around to see if I could see anything, whilst keeping my hand with my phone outstretched, to not only see if anything was here, but to maybe get the chance to record it. The feeling didn't go away, and when I heard a strange noise coming from this empty place, did I bolt it out of there and ran all the way back to my room. I was in tears. I don't think I'd ever felt so much fear in my entire life, and I just wanted to go back to our old home. I told my sister about it, and the next day we went down with tape, a few lights, and a few other bits and bobs in order to see properly down there. It was a very uninteresting room, to be fair, with nothing in it, just a strange and odd presence. After that, I started sleeping better. I wonder if it had anything to do with discovering that secret room. I don't know what its purpose was, or why it was there to begin with, but it makes for a good story, and certainly a handful of creepy situations. And after the room feeling empty and calmer for a few years, did I think that whatever was here before had gone away, until it returned with a vengeance. There were times when the fear would be so indescribably big that I'd have to leave the house itself and visit friends. It was terrifying. Everything came to a close when one night I was just hanging up my school uniform for the next day in the closet, and all of a sudden, a gust of wind pushes me and slams the closet door shut. The originator of the gust of wind was the closet itself, as all my doors, including my inside hallway door, were closed, so there's no way that amount of wind came from anywhere inside, because it simply didn't. And I think, but I'm not sure, that I heard my name being whispered through the wind as it passed through. But I don't know 100%. After telling my mum and dad about this, did they start getting concerned? They too had had strange stuff happen to them in their closet, but I was too scared to ask, as mine had been acting up far too much. My parents spoke and decided that they would try and get a smaller place in the city, and that country life really wasn't for them. As it was my dad's friend, we moved out pretty quickly, and were actually back in the same building but a different apartment, which was familiar, but nicer. Here's the kicker though. A few years later, we're having a barbecue in a different house now. My dad had got promoted since then and we can afford somewhere bigger. He's talking to his friend and asks what happened to the house we lived in. He says that the next people who rented it kept complaining about seeing something in the closet, a shadow moving very fast, which they couldn't see properly, and that their daughter started complaining about the little girl coming out of the closet at night and trying to speak to her. She said there was something strange about her face, but I never got that detail. All I know is that there's something weird going on in that house, specifically the closet, and I'm not sure what it is. Could it be a young girl's restless spirit caught within the confines of the room underneath the closet? Who knows? I'm just glad I never saw her, and hope the restless soul can find peace. In the summer of 2012, I met my friend Tom at Dairy Queen for ice cream. He asked if his friend Ben could meet us there as well. Apparently, he had met Ben at the library where he was working at the time. I said, yeah, that's great, I love meeting new people. Ben comes with his guitar and starts playing beautifully. From this encounter, it seems like Ben is a really chill and down-to-earth guy. He then adds me on Facebook a few days later, and that's nothing out of the ordinary. And he starts making casual conversation. There are some strange things that arise though. When I met him, he had an accent that I couldn't put my finger on. He ended up telling me he was born and raised in the UK, and was a musician there until he moved to the US at age 18. I thought, okay, he really doesn't sound like he's from there, but alright. Around this time I started to date a guy called Kyle. Over the course of a few months, Ben is flirting with me a bit, and I try to make it obvious that I'm uninterested, and he seems to get the picture. At this point, the spring semester at college starts, and I find out Ben is in the same class as me, just at a different time. There's a class field trip to a museum where both classes are joined. I notice Ben and we make casual conversation. We go our own separate ways, and that's when things get weird. We were in a massive museum in New York City, yet I seemed to see Ben lurking everywhere I went. It really freaked me out, and by the time the trip was done, he messaged me going in pretty hard with the flirting all over again. I mentioned to him how I don't really like the way he's talking to me, but he still tried. I even ignored him at certain points. Why I didn't delete him at the time is beyond me, but I digress. I eventually just told my boyfriend and showed him the messages, and it gets even weirder. Kyle asked me what his name was. Then he saw his profile picture. He gasps and shouts, "Ben? That's definitely not his name. I know the guy, he's called Steve. He went to our high school and he's insane." I'm in total shock right now because it just made everything so much creepier. Then Kyle tells me about how he tried to do the same thing to his ex-girlfriend. So basically, Steve contacted Kyle's ex-girlfriend while they were dating, fed her the same lies, flirted with her and stalked her. Apparently, Steve told Kyle's ex that his name was Peter. Kyle said that he nearly got into a fight with him, but Steve backed off and switched schools. Kyle asked if he could use my phone to message him, and at first I was reluctant, but Kyle showed me his yearbook and confirmed that literally everything was a lie. Honestly, I couldn't really believe Steve's whole backstory. But did I really have a reason to call him out on it or question it? I didn't really care until it got eerie, and I didn't want to instigate further stalking. Anyway, Cal messages him from my account. "Hey Steve, it's Kyle, remember me?" Then that's where Steve gets hostile. He starts losing his mind and getting very aggressive, adamantly denying that he is Steve, but is Ben. Kyle sends him photos of him from the yearbook and tells him to leave me alone. Steve says that he's going to contact the police for harassment and whatnot, and by the end of these absurd accusations, he just blocks Kyle and I on social media altogether. Steve got found out for the second time by the same guy for the same thing. I'm not sure if Steve just hates or is obsessed with Kyle and wants to try and steal his girl again. But whatever the case, this guy is straight up crazy. Who lies about their identity and is that stupid to go for the same guy's new girlfriend? I'm still blocked to this day, and hope to not meet you again, Steve. I think there was a ghost of a little girl in a house I lived in West Atlanta. One summer day I was home alone, and left but forgot my sunglasses. I went back to the house to look for them. I said out loud, "I just had them." And immediately, a sing-song voice mockingly replied, "I just had them." I said out loud, "And I don't need them," and noped out of there. A few weeks later, I was in the kitchen cooking dinner. My 4-year-old son was watching Super Y. I had full view of him. We were the only ones home. On the show, the character Wyatt asks, "What's your name?" And I hear, "Angel," clear as day. My son hadn't said anything, didn't react, and just kept momming because I wasn't really scared. I was just startled. I mean, the ghost is watching PBS. The other odd thing that happened is a light bulb had screwed out of the dining room chandelier and placed on a table 3 feet away. Scarves I had draped over a hook in my bedroom somehow got tied, and only adults could reach them, and my husband swore he hadn't done it either. And I believed him, because his reaction was that of being so incredibly freaked out. I lived off the base of Pikes Peak in Colorado Springs, and during the spring and summer, I spent a lot of time in the mountains. By far the scariest thing that has ever happened to me in those mountains was an hour-long lightning storm that ended up putting me and 2 of my buddies in quite a bit of danger. 5 of us came up together in a Jeep Wrangler and a Hummer, and while on our way, we got a phone call from someone saying they would meet us. Great. Directions to the spot are given, as well as directions to a go-to spot that was very easy to find off a main road before it got woody, in case they could not find our camping spot. After a certain amount of time would pass, one of us would leave for the go-to spot and guide the 3rd car back. This is sometimes how we go about things to plan around loss of cell service. Well, enough time passed for 2 of us to hop into the Hummer and go find our other friend. This left 3 of us to hang out, which was no problem, until the storm hit. If you've never been on the Front Range of Colorado during hail season, then you won't understand how very devastating and quick a storm can form, and oddly enough break up and then calm. Seemingly out of nowhere, a light drizzle, which quickly turned to heavy rain, and then marble-sized hail. Just as quickly as the storm hit us, we realized our biggest problem. The Jeep only had 2 seats, and it's filled up with camping supplies, a very nice telescope, and other odds and ends. There was no room for 3 people. period. It was unspoken that we should not leave someone outside in the hail, nor would just one of us go into the Jeep. We were in this. Getting obliterated by rain and annoyed by some decent hail, the electricity started flying. We were in a canyon, so thunder was rolling and echoing and sounding as if Zeus had just found out I just gave Calliope a poke and never returned her call. The noise was terrifying. We found a blue tarp in the back of the Jeep and were just able to tie it to a few trees to at least shelter us from the rain. But it was one particular bolt of lightning that changed my respect for the power of the Rockies. About 50 feet from where we were hurdled was a fence that outlined the property of a very large ranch. You couldn't see the ranch by any means, but the fence was clear as day, as well as a large pillar that stuck from the ground with a sign that said, "Warning, trespassers may be shot," or something similar bolted to it. While we were waiting for the storm to pass, and all the while among dozens of very loud and bright clashes of thunder and lightning, a massive bolt bends around the mountain, of which's base we were against, and strikes onto this post, absolutely frying it. It was as if the bolt clung to the post for a solid 2 to 3 seconds. Needless to say, we were horrified, because this was considerably less than 100 feet away, and this bolt was huge. The most disturbing part of it was for about 10 seconds after the bolt had gone away, that trespassing sign was glowing molten red and vibrated so loudly that we could hear it over the rest of the storm. Our friends in the Hummer returned perhaps 45 minutes after this, and by then, the sky was clear, and it wasn't 75 degrees again. So, this started about 3 years ago, when I was about 18. I was using Grindr, and someone called Rando messaged me. We started talking with the usual conversation starters. How are you? What are you up to? And then Rando began to sound rather depressed. He was moaning about his insecurities and how everyone hated him, and occasionally talking about how he should just end it all. Me being the nice person that I am, I try finding something about him that I could compliment on, and try to make him feel better, that sort of thing, or bring a smile at the least, and that's when things began to get heavy. Rando began deflecting my compliments, calling me a liar or a user, and saying that I'm just trying to make fun of him. I tried my best to reassure him that my compliments were genuine, because I hate seeing people depressed or down. It's just in my nature to bring joy to people. Now, I have been in his shoes before, with severe insecurities, so I know how he felt. After he finally began to believe that my compliments were real, he started to get very attached to me, and started berating me with messages. He'd send me 20 in one go, and if I didn't reply within about 5 seconds, he'd be like, "Oh, I guess you found someone better to talk to. You're like all the rest." And it began to get frustrating at this point. Now I could have just blocked him and saved me from the headache, but I have anxiety, and feared that he'd turn up at my door someday and do something drastic if I blocked him. He also tried sending me nudes to grab my attention when I didn't reply, literally instantly to his messages, and it got worse and worse from here. Eventually he told me he'd be in my town over the weekend, and began to get very pushy about meeting up somewhere and doing some things. I didn't reply. He flips out, and started finding me on different social medias to keep tabs on me. Facebook messages, friend requests, Instagram follows. I went out on a night out with some friends of mine, and at the time forgot he was in town over the weekend, and he saw me walking down the street and ran up to me, bawling his eyes out about me trying to avoid him, and began begging for my phone number and house address and whether he could join us on our night out, and when we politely refused, he followed us further and tried forcing drinks into my hand when we got to the bar. Infuriated by how clingy he was being, I went home, just to realize he boarded the same bus as me and followed me back to my place before he finally vanished. He started messaging me on Grindr about how he was going to visit me someday, and tried to find my friends in order to get my phone number. I finally snapped at this point and blocked him and thought I was done with him. This whole experience has really put me off dating people with severe insecurities out of fear that something like this would happen again, and I've been trying to go against my nature and avoid complimenting people too much, to avoid something like this again. It's been 3 years, and I haven't seen him since. I'm the oldest of 5 kids. Growing up, we lived on our family farm that has been lived in by my dad's family since the 1700s. So there's a lot of people who have lived and died there before. Growing up, I was always afraid of ghosts, especially anything that would hurt me. But it wasn't until I was about 8 that I realized ghosts can be kind of nice too. Not all of them want to scare you. Although I was little, I remember it all pretty vividly. I was sitting on the driveway with my dog playing with chalk, when my dog sat up and looked over at the old barn about 30 yards away. I didn't really care what my dog saw, but something kind of pulled me to look over there. And when I did, that's when I saw a younger looking woman with her hair done up, wearing a rose-colored dress. As soon as I saw her though, she was gone. She didn't dissipate or fade away. It's like she was never even there to begin with. Like I said, I was 8 at the time, so I ran inside and started crying to my mum about a woman over the barn. So she went out and looked around and there was nothing. Fast forward to dinner that night, she brings it up to my dad, who curiously asks what she looked like. I explain her to him, and as soon as I mention the dress, he puts his fork down and goes to grab a shoebox from the parlor. He rifles through a bit before pulling out an old picture of the exact woman that I saw by the barn. When I confirmed that was her, my dad sat down with a tear in his eye and explained it was his mum, my grandmother. She died when he was 6, so I never met her and had no idea what she looked like. But my dad guessed her spirit had just been hanging out keeping an eye on me while I played, because that rose-colored dress was her favorite, and was the dress she was buried in. I lived in a house that was haunted. My room must have been the worst area, because my siblings and stepdad did hear and see things, but I got something just about every night that would happen. Constant footsteps and the feeling of being watched. Walking through my room, I'd suddenly hit spots that were freezing cold. The typical ghost signs everyone hears about in movies. But it got stranger when it followed us to our next house, and got worse to the point that my mum finally believed me when she saw a hand reaching from underneath a door right next to her. After 3 weeks of living in that house, my cat scratched my arm pretty deeply when I picked her up, and then we didn't see her for a week. We were searching like crazy. We went back to our old house and found her inside and completely shut and locked in the boarded up house. It was an old farmhouse and we got evicted, and she was inside a closet upstairs with the door closed in on her, and the door even opened outwards, so she couldn't have closed it on herself easily. Luckily, she was still alive, but nearly starved to death. Everything continued and just got worse. Hearing the thuds of someone hammering their fists on the walls would wake me up every single night, but I always would wake up at a different time. It would do 3 to wake me up, Then, as if to prove to me that it wasn't just my imagination when I woke up, it would do one more and stop every night. Then we found out that my mum's ex-husband had touched my brother inappropriately. A while after we found out, I was alone in my room at night. I wished that he would die, and I immediately heard a thump on the wall. He killed himself within the week. However, the spooky things didn't stop there. The first thing that ever happened at the house, actually, was shortly after we moved in, and it was one of the few times that it wasn't me it happened to. My stepdad was downstairs at the house watching TV, when we heard someone running across the floor upstairs heading towards his model train room. He thought I was still home, since I was the only one with a room upstairs. He grabbed his 2x4 that had a handle on it, and started heading towards the stairs to go paddle my ass, since I wasn't allowed in there, when he started hearing really loud thuds. He said it was like someone was up there knocking bureaus and throwing his boxes of trains. He said he began yelling, and it kept going. Then halfway up the stairs it got dead quiet, and he started to think that it wasn't me, since I didn't answer when he called. So he went back downstairs and got his gun. When he went back, everything was exactly how it was left. This was the only reason he started believing me when things happened. My mum wasn't convinced at all. Every night I heard footsteps on the ceiling above my room, without fail. There would be also a lot of thuds that sounded like they were coming from random spots on my wall. There was one night where it was happening every time I would finally think it was over. Just set slow thuds over and over again, 2 to 4 at a time, pausing every few seconds between each knock. My mum heard it from their bedroom and was relatively close by one when I had already fallen asleep, and sent Shane to come and yell at me. But on his way over he could hear the knocking right on the door of my bedroom. He opened it and I was passed out on my bed. I woke up to him listening to the wall, trying to find out where the noise was coming from at about 3 a.m. One day I was with my brother downstairs switching off while playing Big Mooth the Truckers, and we heard running footsteps coming from my room. My brother hadn't any experiences with it, even though his room is directly beneath mine, and he got really nervous when I casually mentioned that it was the ghost and would stop if we ignored it. Being a mean older brother and having gotten used to it, I offered to go investigate with him. Again, he stopped on our way up the stairs. My brother was so scared at this point. He brought a steak knife with him. And to give you an idea of the surroundings, my room at the time was absolutely huge. Like, so big that I just arranged my furniture to only use half of it, because I didn't have much stuff. On the side of the room I didn't use, there was a closet that I always covered up with a sheet, because it made me nervous at night, with all the noises going on. When we walked through the doorway, the first thing we noticed was that the sheet was blown way up into the air, even through there, despite the fact that there was no wind in the room, and no window was open upstairs. By this point I was too afraid, and my brother was running down the stairs before the sheet had time to settle. For some reason I had courage that day and went to take a look, but when I got close I could hear scratching as well as relieved thinking that it was just the cat. But I looked around the inside and couldn't see her, but could still hear the scratching. It sounded just like a cat trying to get through an open door. When I listened closely, I could hear it coming from the left wall, and I put my hand on the wall and felt it move. And then I realized that it wasn't the wall, and it was just one of those boards that you would put tool hangers on and stuff, where it has all those tiny holes all throughout the board that the legs of the hangers insert into. When it fell away, I felt a freezing burst of air to my face that sent me running out of the house. When my parents finally got home, we went and looked at it. There was a small crevice behind it that was probably about 3 foot high and a couple of feet deep. All I could picture was my imagination, with a 5-year-old kid curled up and hiding in there. The next time my family was gone, I boarded the damn thing up with plywood and covered it up with a sheet. But every now and then, I would see the sheet kick up, like there was a breeze coming through it. One morning months after this, I woke up and my arm was itching like crazy. I felt a bit of a jump with my hand and thought it was mosquito bite, but then I realized it wasn't just a little round bug bite. It was like a bump forming a line. So I finally sat up and pulled my shirt off to look at where I had felt it. On my left bicep right below my shoulders, there was a red mark in the shape of a hand. I really don't know how to explain it, but it was pretty much indented on my skin, and the bump I felt was the outline. The hand was tiny and only had 3 fingers and a thumb, but it didn't look like it was missing a finger. It just looked like it had the hand that only was supposed to have 3 fingers. I would say it wasn't much bigger than a 10-year-old's hand. It was also a left hand print from what I could tell. I sat there for at least 15 minutes trying to lay my hand on it in a way that would match up, but it didn't seem possible. It was still bright red when I decided to leave my room for the second time, and I got downstairs to show my mother, but it was gone. I had thought for sure that she would believe me if she had seen it. Then we moved into a second house, and things died down for 3 to 4 weeks, until my mum was working with my stepdad on our bathroom, and she was sitting on the floor just outside the door, passing tools and such. She noticed a hand reaching under the door to my brother's room. She thought it was my brother trying to scare her, so she quickly opens the door to bonk him on the head. But, just like before, he was in his bed fast asleep, all the way on the other side of the room. She finally believed me after that. It was only 2 to 3 days after this that the cat went missing, and we found her in the old house locked in the closet. Things started back up again with the footsteps and thumping. A lot of stuff happened in between. I was stressed and depressed, about as far as anyone could possibly go. I was constantly berated at school, and had recently been beaten up by 5 of those kids. I was getting hit and verbally abused about daily, but my arsehat stepfather had to work on the farm almost all the time, before and after school, and had recently found out that my brother had been touched inappropriately by my previous stepfather. I was never touched to that level, but some things came to light in my mind that still haunt me. And the year before, my best friend / brother had died of cancer. I was only 13, but I really wanted life to end at that point. I went out to our big barn in the middle of the night and got a rope. On the 2nd floor of the barn was a huge window. I was sitting on the window crying when I got cold and looked behind me. I could see someone standing in the corner of the barn. I saw that often in the barns, but always out of the corner of my eye. This time I stared. I must have sat there staring for a solid 2 minutes, and I started calmly talking, telling it how much I didn't care anymore. I taunted it. I wanted it to push me out the window so I didn't have to do it myself. It just stood there completely black and completely silent. Eventually, I just got angry and told it to piss off, and that I'm done with everything. And so I went back inside, and that's when I grabbed the 2x4 and just went into my parents' room and hit him as hard as I could with it. I was a coward, so I only hit his arm, but he woke up and I ran. He chased me outside in his boxers and grabbed the first thing that he could see, one of those adjustable wrenches, and threw it at my back, but I kept on running. My mum finally left him when I told her that I had been thinking about ending it all. Well, she left him for about a month before they got back together. But what it did accomplish was moving far away from that area for good. And when they got back together, he moved to where we were living. I haven't been haunted, except for 2 strange dreams that were ridiculously vivid out-of-body experiences, where I came back to find a girl that was with me in my bed. She was being ripped apart by a completely black, small figure of a boy. They just looked and felt so real. I remember feeling burning on my arm and feeling the warmth of blood getting on my face when I walked into the room, but nothing else had actually happened, except for when I went back to the farm earlier this year during the summer, which was very unsettling, as I'm still confused as to what the hell was going on there. Years ago, when I was hanging out at a friend's house in the living room playing games or something, I noticed a man kept coming out of a room and staring at us. When I looked at him, he would go back into the room. I figured it was his uncle, but after about an hour of back and forth between him watching us, me looking at him and him going back into the room, I got pretty annoyed, and I ended up asking my friend what his uncle was doing, and he let us know that he's been in a run and isn't home yet. Hearing that, I asked him who the man was who had been watching us the entire time from that room in the hallway. He said there was no room and no other men that live in the house besides him. I pointed to the room and he said it was a closet. I checked to make sure, and after that, everyone was freaked out. His family ended up getting monks to cleanse the home because of it. There have been 3 times I have seen and felt spirits. The first time was around my mum. She was talking about her late father, my grandpa, who I adored, but lost when I was rather young. She started feeling cold on her left side, and moments later, I saw a light shim in my vision. It looked like a man hunched over, his hand placed on her left arm. It was there not just for a second, and even after rubbing my eyes and looking away, and back to it, I still saw it. It was there. Not as clear as one would imagine seeing a spirit, but he was clearly there. The second time around was with my now ex-girlfriend. We were talking about something to do during dinner. I thought she poked my side, and when I looked at her asking what's up, she said nothing. And when I looked at her mother, who said her daughter was talking with her and did not poke me, I saw a small boy with a bowl haircut standing next to her, just like the shim I saw my grandfather in. I described the boy, and the mother said it might have been her son, who she'd lost some time ago. Later, the same spirit, the boy, pushed me when we were walking in the forest, as if he wished to play, and then ran ahead of me. This originally started with my psycho ex having a psycho family. We were young. He knew his family was psycho, which led him to moving out/running away from home to live with a friend, without telling his parents. So he packs up his stuff one night and leaves. I knew what he was doing and where he was going, which was not my house. I woke up the next day to his entire British family, mum, dad and grandmother, in my front yard, yelling at my house, telling me I was going to rot in hell where I belong, and that I'm a worthless, horrible and disgusting maggot of a girl. Eventually, my mum came out of the house and shooed them away and told them to get off our yard. We thought this was kind of a one-time thing. Obviously, because what the hell? Why would you do that to a 16-year-old? A few days later, I was with the boyfriend and some friends downtown hanging out. We see his mum's car coming towards us and he starts running away. So me and the other friends all just kind of split up and start quickly walking away down different little side streets. Somehow the mum pulls a U-turn and follows me. I call my mum and ask her if she can come and get me. "Hey mum, Susan is following me. I'm on City Avenue and I'm scared." She keeps driving really fast behind me and then slowing down, and while I'm on the phone with my mum, I hear the car revving up so fast, and then she swerves across someone's driveway and almost runs me over. She starts yelling at me, screaming about what a terrible person I am, and I manage to kind of run away from her and get to somewhere that my mum can pick me up. After the car incident, my mum made me wear a disguise whenever I left the house. The family kept coming and yelling on the yard, and I had to get a restraining order against 3 adults as a 16-year-old. About a month later, we were staying over at the friend's house where the boyfriend lived. We woke up in the morning to a lot of chaos. His father was outside the window of his first-floor apartment, banging on the window, screaming, "I know you're in there." He then sees me through the window and starts calling me all kinds of colourful names and other really pleasant things. I duck into the bathroom to call the police, because A, this is a disturbance, and B, it's terrifying. And finally, I have a restraining order against this man, and he's breaking it. While I'm in the bathroom, my friends turn on some really loud music to drown out the man's yelling. The police finally come and get him to leave, basically. A lot more smaller drama happens over the few months, and my boyfriend goes to visit his cousin for a weekend, disappears for a week, and was actually staying with a girl, got her pregnant, didn't tell me, broke up with me, and then came back with no explanation why. I found out 10 months later that this guy has an entire baby. I'm over this guy by now, so all I can think of is, okay, that's just karma. A few years down the line, I hear from a bunch of people about some guy at a university 4 hours away that did a bunch of acid in the library and climbed on a desk and claimed to be a god, and threw a bunch of chairs around. Even later down the road, I found out that this guy was my ex. My life is seriously a roller coaster. Many years ago, when I was a little one, my mum was on the computer doing whatever adults do on those magic boxes that house 3D pinball and FreeCell. I, being the greedy little gorb I was, decided I wanted a crunchy from the kitchen. And so I walked downstairs, and as I walked into the dining room, I heard a man's voice say, "Hey, Jay, it's okay." I thought maybe it was just my mum calling me from upstairs, and so I got my crunchy, ran upstairs and asked, "What is it, mummy?" To which she said, "I didn't call you." For a while after, I used to swear I could see the figure of a man standing in my bedroom at night, and would tell my mum about the man in my room who came out of the wardrobe. She always just brushed it off, and went with saying, "Night-night," to the man in the wardrobe before I slept. Well, for years there was nothing, and as I grew older it just developed into me realizing how much of a silly kid I was, making this nonsense up. Until about 2 years ago, I woke up earlier than normal. I was daydreaming someone had been calling my name. After waking up and realizing no one was in my room or even calling my name, I was ready to brush it off and go back to sleep, until a man's voice said, "Jay, I miss you." Now call me insane, but this freaked me out, and I felt like telling people would just make me look like a waste of oxygen. But about a year ago, I stumbled upon a bunch of old cassettes, which she had recorded over the years, and played one in the radio to see what it was. Eventually a tape came up, and there was the voice. It was engraved in my brain. I couldn't forget it. My granny told me that was my dad talking. My dad died nearly 20 years ago, and I never got to know him and have no memories of him as I was far too young. He loved me and never had me out of his arms. With myself being quite a skeptical person, it was hard to grasp this, as it is against a lot of things I believe to be the case. However, from what it seems, my dad has always been there. Never seen, but definitely heard. So, I had made a new friend in 7th grade, and we decided to have a sleepover at her house. She had a small bed, so she said that I could sleep in her room and she would sleep in her brother's room. He was always away. So I finally go to bed, and all night long, I feel like someone was staring at me. I kept waking up and impulsively looking at the same spot. Finally, morning comes, and I tell her what happened, and she proceeds to tell me her older brother was possessed as a child, and that his spirit, Charlie, follows her family around. I noped the hell out of there, and never slept over again. But wait, there's more. A few months later, I went back to her house to hang out, and we brought more friends, another 2 girls and 2 guys. Well, apparently Charlie doesn't like males. So we were in her room and all of a sudden the door slams shut. Screaming rings out from all around us. One of the guys tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. For the next 5-ish minutes, panic is going through all of us, while my friend who lives there is trying to calm us down. Finally, the door opens, and everyone was too scared to walk out, so I dumbly went first. So you have to round a corner to go downstairs in her house. I round the first corner, and the next thing I see is a picture frame flying off the wall straight towards me. It landed a good 2 feet away from me, and I bolt the hell down the stairs, and I never entered that house again. My parents' house got hit by a tornado when I was in high school. You don't realize how fast those things happen until you've been in that situation. We live in rural North Carolina. Not exactly Tornado Alley, but we do get some bad storms now and again. My dad had this habit of liking to sit out and watch thunderstorms come in. We were all inside where we hear him yelling for us to come out. We'd walk out and the sky would just look surreal. There were all kinds of black clouds sweeping towards our house at a disturbingly fast pace. When I say black, I don't mean really dark grey or steely blue. I mean black. Jet black clouds. Like an ink cloud from a giant octopus that squirted into the sky. I've never seen it before in my life. Not even on a video, and hope to never see it again. So we were pretty freaked out by the clouds, and the wind was picking up. I mean, those clouds were moving fast. Someone, I think it was my mum, said something to the effect that maybe we should get inside just to be safe. But things started going crazy even before we could turn around. The wind goes from a 7 out of 10 on the windy scale to a 25 in about 3 seconds flat. We turn to the inside, and I'm the last to go through the door. I try to pull it closed behind me, but the wind is sucking the door open. I have to pull with both hands on the knob and jerk back with my full weight to get the door shut. At this point, it's been about 45 seconds since our dad originally called us outside. We run to the hallway and start throwing things out of the closets under the stairs and climbing in. The whole house is full of this absolutely indescribable roaring noise. It was like a jet was taking off on our roof, or a train was driving through the living room. It wasn't so much sound as a physical force. It made your head throb. It was so loud. You could feel it constantly in the pit of your stomach, like the boom from a loud bass speaker. But instead of having a beat, it was just constant. It felt like your eyeballs were quivering in your head. The pressure changes from the wind also screwed with your sense of balance. I kept getting the sense of vertigo that you feel when standing on top of a cliff looking down. It was an absolute sensory overload. We all jump under the stairs and shut the door when we realize we had left the dog out in the house. My mum opens the door and yells for the dog, which comes barreling into the closet like a bat out of hell. We shut the door, and at this point it's been maybe a minute and a half, just 90 seconds, since we were sitting in the kitchen chatting, and my dad yelled at us to come outside and look at these crazy clouds. That's how long it took to go from a normal evening to an absolute horror. We sat under the stairs for maybe that much time again. 2 minutes pass, possibly 3 at most. It seemed like longer, of course, and everything was shaking. I was just waiting for the walls to tear apart around us, or debris to start smashing through the floor. Then the sound passed, and we came out. The house was still standing around us. So far, so good. We go back out on the front porch and the door won't open. I give it a heave and push it open, and squeeze out. The porch is destroyed. We had a small barn sitting in front of our house, and it had been obliterated. The tornado had picked up the barn, turned it into kindling, and threw it at our house. The posts on the front porch were all destroyed, and it was just covered with broken glass, nails, shattered 2x4s and pieces of particle board. Looking out over our pasture in front of the house, where we kept a horse and some cows, and there were just masses of trees down everywhere. One strand of pines in the south of our house, and probably about 2 or 3 acres of trees in total were just gone. Our cars were pockmarked with hail damage. One full-size pontoon boat that we used for family trips to the lake on weekends had been picked up from the front yard, rotated 90 degrees, and deposited in the backyard about 50 yards away. Behind our house, a massive poplar tree was down over the driveway, and it had fallen just feet from the house. Yet, other things remained weirdly untouched. One of our barns was destroyed, but the other, standing maybe 30 yards away, wasn't missing a shingle. All in all, we were incredibly lucky. The house sustained major damage. Despite its appearance, though, the roof had to be replaced because the suction from the tornado had made it unstable. In fact, to this day, you can still see cracks in the walls and the corners of the top floor, where the tornado had nearly sucked the roof off the house. But we came out, none of us hurt, and even slept in our own beds that night. So when I see stories like that out of Oklahoma a while ago, I always think back to those few minutes of horror, and how lucky I was that those weren't my last moments, as they were for so many others. My dad passed away when I was 16, from complications due to a motorcycle accident 3 years prior. We had moved out of the house he passed in and into a new one rather quickly. The first thing we set up was his little memorial spot. He was cremated and kept with us because his last words were, "I want to be with my family." This little shrine, as we like to call it, was at the top of the stairs outside my bedroom. One night, I had both my closet and bedroom door open and started seeing something black dart in and out of view in my closet, like it was peeking its head out at me. I got a bad feeling about it, but tried to ignore it, but it persisted. I called my boyfriend at the time and tried to distract myself with conversation, but it kept on going. My boyfriend was never a believer in ghosts, so when I told him about what was happening, it was no surprise that he dismissed it. I was sure I could prove him wrong, so I started taking pictures on my iPad and scouring them over trying to find a black mass in the closet. I didn't find anything of note, so I gave up and put the iPad down. At some point in my phone conversation, I lay the iPad while it was still on picture mode, causing it to zoom into the corner of the room above the bedroom door. Without even trying to see anything, I could clearly see my dad's head shape and broad shoulders. It looked like he was wearing sunglasses too. I like to think he was checking in on me, or maybe keeping whatever it was in the closet close at bay. Everyone I showed the picture to could see him too. I eventually put a picture of him in sunglasses next to the iPad pic, and put a giant red circle around Ghostad. Now, I only have that version of the picture instead of the original. But anyway, I can't remember what generation my iPad was. This was 2011. Beyond the doorway in the stand, my dad's urn sat, along with pictures and candles. Maybe that's why he showed up. I'm not sure. This is a true account of what happened to me, somewhere between 1992 to 1994. I was roughly 15 years old, and am female. My house was unbelievably haunted, not only by several spirits, but also a poltergeist that I had seemingly created completely unaware due to my teenage angst and my sensitivity abilities. I need to give you a quick layout of part of the house. So if you were looking at my house from my garden, the living room and dining room were on the ground floor, and on the second floor, my bedroom was on the right-hand side of the house. My parents' bedroom on the left. In between us was a box room with a window with no opening that had a tall chest of drawers which contained clean bedding and towels. The box room was a strange room. It was always hot in there. My house was cold all year round, even in summer still cold. The atmosphere in there felt thick and just really weird. It was a school night because my parents had gone to bed early, as they both had work, but I'm pretty sure it was the summer holidays because I knew I wasn't in school the next day. So I stayed up to watch TV with my 20-year-old sister as she was staying over on the couch. The reason she wouldn't sleep in the guest bedroom was because it was the most haunted room in the house. I've known this because it used to be my bedroom until my other sister moved out, and then I had her much bigger bedroom, which was at the front of the house as I described previously. So I think I went to bed around 1, and I switched my TV on and fell asleep. With only 4 channels, and one of them being Welsh, it was easy to fall asleep, and I couldn't actually sleep unless my TV was on anyway. Previously, when it had been switched off, I had seen a lot of shadows on the black screen, and even my dog had been reflected in it. And though he was on my bed with me, when he wasn't even in my bedroom. Very creepy. Just when I started to get sleepy, all hell broke loose. The house shook really hard. I thought it was an earthquake. The banging was so loud and hard. I remember sitting up in bed in shock, reassuring myself it was just a mild earthquake. But after a few minutes, it got worse, and I realized that the noise was coming from the box room. I thought it was my sister looking for bedding, so I shouted, "Shut up, Joe, you're gonna wake Mum and Dad." And I listened out for a reply, and there was none. And my sister is definitely the type to reply. I then thought there's no possible way it could have been her, because I doubt she could even create that level of noise if she tried. It had escalated to pure pandemonium. That's the only way I can describe it. The ceiling was being banged on. The walls, the floors, and the house was shaking. I then thought perhaps my dad was snoring too loud, and my mum is looking for bedding to use in the guest bedroom while in a bad mood. I guess I wished it was her, and not something otherworldly. I was seriously petrified that I felt sick and was trembling. So many ghostly things happened to me in that house, but was this really another occurrence? I was used to having things thrown at me, or my stereo turning on full blast in the middle of the night, not to mention other stuff. But this? I manned up, got out of bed, and was scared stiff, but I opened my bedroom door to the pitch black landing. I have a huge phobia of the dark thanks to this house, so just being in the dark gave me chills to the bone, because deep down, I knew what it was. At that exact time as I opened my door, my mum was coming out of her bedroom, which was opposite mine, with the box room between us. Then my sister turned on the landing light, and came halfway up the stairs so that she could see my mum and I, almost as though we had all done it in synchronicity. I had chills all over, and I was so scared. In the pit of my stomach, I had butterflies, and not the good kind. My mum and I stood staring at each other, and it was as though time stood still. We were in a state of confusion, because we were all accounted for. And to quote my mum, "Your dad's in bed, asleep, and Joe, you're on the stairs. So Emma, if you and me are right here, then who the hell is in there?" While we stood outside the box room, the pandemonium was still going on. However, as my mum said the "who the hell is in there" part, it stopped. Absolute silence. We all looked at each other. Then almost on cue, the box room door handle started to turn really slowly. We all fled back to our respective beds. I locked my door, got under my covers, and was so terrified. If it could create that type of noise, to me it was pretty clear that it could harm us. Me, no doubt. I somehow fell asleep, and before I knew it, it was morning. After breakfast, my sister came into the kitchen and asked if I'd been into the box room. I said, no chance, not on my own. She then suggested it could have been our cat, who liked to jump into the open drawers and sleep on our clothes. So for that reason, in every chest of drawers in the house, a drawer always has to be left half open, due to her being trapped once. A cat? You actually think a cat could create that? I wasn't aware we had a lion, Joe. So the two of us went up there. We knew the room would be smashed up. There was no way it couldn't have been. Being the eldest, Joe pulled the handle and opened the door. We were both gobsmacked. Everything was as it should be. It was tidy, and not a thing was out of place. We were both in shock. Just a few hours earlier, it sounded like it was being smashed up. We looked at each other in confusion. This leads me to another occurrence that happened when I had the back bedroom prior to the box room incident. It was the exact same thing in the study, which was directly under my bedroom. Pandemonium and chaos during the middle of the night. Except I was the only one that could hear it. It went on for a good 20 minutes, but to me it felt much longer. I started crying. Every occurrence, except a few, was to affect me, scare me, hurt me. I was at my wit's end. Nobody believed it was a poltergeist. I got the blame because this time the room had been trashed, pages ripped out of valuable books. My parents were fuming, and they grounded me over it. I really don't care if people believe me or not. I know it's true, and I know what I went through the whole time that I lived there. I have never shared this story before. This happened when I was 10 or 11. I was living with my mum and sister in a super old rural farmhouse, probably from the early 1900s in Northern California, the town of Loomis. It was a basic 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom house with a cellar and attic, and lots of land for horses and fruit trees. So one hot summer day, when my sister, mother and I were all home, I was playing Warcraft 2 or something on my computer, and started to hear extremely loud and violent banging on the wall. It was literally rattling on the windows. Being rather absorbed in my gameplay, I let it go until a few minutes had passed, at which point my confusion meter had reached its limits, and I had to figure out what was causing it. Naturally, I assumed it was my sister, who was 16 at the time and was being stupid, kicking the walls with both legs. That's how loud it sounded. But she wasn't. In fact, she assumed I was doing the same. It confused both of us, because it was even louder than we thought a person could kick the wall. It sounded like a freaking car ran into the house over and over for several hours. We grabbed our mum, who indicated she heard the same thing. None of us were doing it. We looked on the roof and in the attic, both of which were totally clear. The pipes, the plumbing, and the electrical had never made such violent noises before, and were not causing them now. So we were totally at a loss as to what was making these horrible violent bangs. It shook the window panes and could be heard through the entire house. No way could it have been an earthquake, because the floor wasn't shaking. We just heard such loud banging. Coincidentally, this was the same day a family friend's son had died, although I don't know why that would have anything to do with it. Some other creepy stuff happened in the house, not on the same day, but throughout the 3 years that we lived there. I would feel a presence walk out of my mum's bedroom and through the living room behind me when I was there playing video games. My mum also dreamt that a brown smoke was trying to enter her abdomen. She was paralyzed and couldn't scream, but I heard her struggling through the wall. We had a weird shared closet with a door in between our rooms, and woke her up. Another time I went down to the basement to look for something. I seem to remember I was checking on the kittens, to which our cat had given birth to down there, and a strange black mist slowly covered my foot, promptly making me get the hell out of there, and I never returned. I'm guessing that this all had to do with the fact that my mum practiced witchcraft and was actually in a coven for years, but I'm not sure. We never determined the source. My dad also went on to die probably less than a year after this, and we were still living there. Perhaps it was a strange premonition. I would love to hear your thoughts. About a year ago, my cousin and I, who were both 19 at the time, decided to go sailing on a pretty windy day, with about 7 Beaufort and a 1.5 to 2 meter high wave on the North Sea on the Dutch coast. Now, the boat we sailed on was our own, a Dart 18 catamaran, and was over 30 years old. With that age, things break quite easily and often, so we went through the first row of waves, no problems at all, and went about 10 kilometers off the coast. The wind was coming from the east, meaning that we had to zigzag back to the coast, as no boat can sail into the wind. So about a quarter of the way back, suddenly both of our rudders broke, and we had nothing to communicate with. This meant that we had to steer using our sail to get back. That, on its own, is not a very big problem. What is, though, is that with a catamaran it's very difficult to turn when facing the wind. It also means that big waves for an only 18-foot sailboat, plus no rudders, plus A hard wind blowing us away from the coast meant that we were very much sitting there in the sea, thinking that we had no way of getting back. Luckily, we had previous experience with steering with sails only, as we learnt to do that for fun, and we remembered that we could use the high waves to gain extra speed when going down from the wave. So we used that in order to zigzag back. We capsized around 5 times, which was extremely exhausting, especially with those fairly strong winds. It took until about 2 AM to get to the coast, and we landed about 10 kilometers from the club from where the boat had its place. Me and my sister used to share a room. I was around 10 and had to sleep by the closet, and I was always scared of it because our closet door broke off and it was just pitch black in there. I woke up in a cold sweat and started feeling like something was watching me. So I was facing my sister and I flipped over to face the closet. I look over and my mum's silhouette is standing there, looking at her phone with her hand on her hip. I get confused and I say, "Mum?" And then this thing snaps its head over to me. And, I kid you not, it had the most demonic looking glowing red eyes. I got so terrified I just whipped my blanket over my head and didn't move, and eventually fell back asleep. But it was terrifying. It definitely wasn't something from this earth, and I even asked my mum if she was in the room that night, and she said no. I'm not sure if it was my imagination or not, but it was certainly freaky. My grandmother lived with my family for about 4 years before she passed. We were inseparable, and even though she had Alzheimer's, she always remembered my name and who I was. Before I was born, she got into an accident at work and broke her femur, and had to have it replaced with a metal rod, leaving her with a limp and a very distinctive walk/thumping sound. When she died, I was home alone for the first time over the summer, while my parents were at work, and I was 10 years old. I would lock myself in my room every day, because I could hear her thumping noise walking closer and closer to my door. No one in my family believed me, but it was so realistic, I have a hard time doubting it was just my imagination. I've also seen many apparitions of men in suits in and around my house. A very distinctive one was glowing white, and went to walk down my stairs, but turned to look at me before going down. I think I might be losing my mind. Over the summer, my friend and I got a call from another friend who asked us if we were up for an adventure, so naturally we agreed. Our friend wouldn't tell us what this adventure was until we had already gotten into the car and were on our way. He laid out the plan to us. We were going to break into a cabin to meet a boy he met on Tinder. The area was pretty familiar to us, and we were already mid-route, so we were down. We drove up this long driveway to get to the cabin that was isolated enough for us to not get caught, but not to the point it was concerning or out of self-service. The boy we were meeting up with walks into the driveway and breaks into the cabin as we wait outside for him to open the front door. My friends immediately start exploring the cabin and going into all the rooms, but I was feeling uneasy and stood in the kitchen. The boy we had met went into one of the other rooms, and my friends returned to the kitchen with me. Tinder Boy walks back out of the kitchen carrying a shotgun and 2 rounds he had retrieved from wherever he had gone. He starts pointing the gun around, and I immediately begin yelling at him and asking him what the hell he thought he was doing. After scaring the piss out of us all, he just laughed and put the gun on the kitchen table. Seeing that we were uncomfortable, he tells us to follow him into the basement, to which we all reluctantly agree. In the basement, we begin telling stories to break the ice and try to get to know what this boy's deal is. As he tells his own story, he pulls out his pocket knife and starts throwing it around and sticking it into the wooden support posts, bringing back the anxiety in me. He then says he's bored of the basement and brings us back up to the kitchen, where he then steals alcohol from underneath the sink. He offers us all drinks, but my friend and I are more of the smoking type, and didn't want to get caught, so we declined. We all roll up and then head to the porch. On the porch, my friends and I are all standing there smoking along the rail, as he sat back behind the table. I got a weird feeling, so I turn around to find him taking pictures of us. This made me feel really uncomfortable. So I ask him what he's doing, and all he responds with was another laugh. My friends and I all share a "what the hell" look, and after having a few drinks, he goes around back to relieve himself. My friends and I convene to share our uneasiness and decide we need to get out of there ASAP. He comes back, and we had all made our way to the other side of the porch to distance ourselves from him. I look over again and find him taking yet another set of pictures of us. At this point, I can't handle the anxiety, so I text my friend to fake a text from her gram so we had a reason to leave. She fakes the text and we go inside to pack up our stuff. As we're packing up, he grabs the shotgun and waves it at all of us one more time before putting it back. My one friend leaves a handful of change on the table as evidence in case the boy tries to strike and pull some stuff, and this is slightly relevant later. So, our stuff was all gathered and we were all more than ready to leave. We walk outside and head towards the car when the Tinder boy pulls my friend aside, explaining to him that he needs a ride back because he had a curfew. Because my friend was interested in this boy, although I still can't figure out why, he agreed to drive the Tinder boy home. The whole car ride I'm preparing myself to defend with a knife, which thankfully never happened. We drop him off and a wave of relief washed over me. I'm glad I'd never have to see this psychopath again. But fast forward a few months, I'm visiting home over Thanksgiving break, and my friends told me he had showed up to their jobs. They said that he pulled them aside and told them that if anyone were to ask, we had never went into that cabin and didn't know it had existed. I'm assuming the owner noticed the pile of change on the table and missing alcohol, and had alerted the police about it, but I'll never know for sure. Though ominous and bizarre, I just kind of laughed it off, what they had told me, because I now live 4 hours away. Months pass, and I'm currently on my spring break and visiting home. A different set of friends and I decide to go to one of the local thrift stores, as I needed a fitting room, and I go up to one of the employees and ask for one when he turns around, and it was the Tinder boy. My heart sunk and anxiety washed over me. He walked me over and didn't say a word. I think my drastic hair change may have thrown him off. Thank God. This happened months ago. I'm just sharing it now, as a friend of mine recommended it. What I'm about to tell you is all my own account. I'm the only person who can verify this is true, as I was the only witness. My mum and siblings were also in the house this night, and they can confirm the aftermath. However, not the actual event. It started with a nightmare. In my nightmare, I was driving. It had been raining and still was, so the roads were slippery. I had my dog Luna in the car with me. As I'm driving, I look up ahead and notice that past a certain point on the road, all of the cars keep wrecking. So to avoid wrecking, I pull over and decide I'll take Luna and I to a cafe I see. Outside the cafe, along the exterior wall on the way to the door, there are small tables and sets of 2. At the small table nearest me, there sits a mother, her son, and their dog. As Luna and I passed this table, I immediately knew something was horribly wrong. The air had turned freezing cold almost instantly. It had become misty, and you could see my breath. Luna had stopped in her tracks and was peering over towards the family at their table, whimpering. The mum and son were frozen, icy, with horrible, painful expressions on their faces. Their dog was behind them, drowned in a nearby gutter. Then I just started running. As I'm running, my dream changes. I'm no longer in the same scenery or doing the same thing. I didn't even have control of the dream. I was just witnessing it. It's hot and sweaty, and now I'm on my way to meet someone. I know exactly where I'm going. It's this house, maybe better described as a bungalow. It was made out of bamboo, but the inside was nicely furnished. When I walked in, I didn't turn on any lights. I walked directly to the front window, where I stood behind some curtains and patiently waited for my mystery person to arrive. It wasn't long, and someone else was coming. Except, the closer they got, the less it looked like a person walking, and more like a shadow figure floating towards me. This is in my dream. I'm not scared. I feel prepared to meet whoever this is. When they get to the door, I know they must be inside, right behind me, and I don't even turn around. I start hearing voices. Coming for you. It was all about something or someone coming for me. I finally turn around, and the figure rushes at me. It's at this point I wake up. I woke up because I felt a chill on my arm, which had been dangling over the edge of my bed. The chill felt like someone's hair had just brushed over my arm. I opened my eyes and adjusted for a second when I finally looked up from my arm, and I noticed there's someone standing on the bed next to me. My first thought was that it was my sister, as she borrows my headphones often. Maybe she'd bent over to pick them up, and her hair was the chill I felt. However, the more I looked at this person, the more I knew it wasn't the case. He was glowing. There was this ball of light, almost blue, in the middle of his chest area. His white hair seemed to float with the wind from my ceiling fan. He reminded me of a candle flame. This way, his whole body seemed to dance with any motion in the wind. I stared at him, and he stared back at me, with huge orb eyes for what seemed like a long time. I was trying to take in every detail, trying to convince myself this wasn't real. He kept cocking his head from side to side like a confused puppy. He seemed childlike, but also not. He finally decided to push his boundaries, and he took a step towards me. I pushed myself away from him onto the other side of my bed against the wall. The second I did, he left. The way he left was honest to God beautiful. It was like I audibly heard someone blow him out, just as you would a candle. He just left, with whatever wind took him. It's hard to perfectly describe. I never screamed, but the second it was over, I just got this wave of emotions and started bawling my eyes out. I ran to my mum's room and told her everything. She believed me, and says it was just a lost spirit. I don't tell many people about this. I don't like talking about it. To this day, I can no longer sleep unless the light is on. I get panic attacks when thinking or talking about this incident for too long. As I'm recounting this, I'm shaking. I wanted to hear others' thoughts on my story, and see if anyone has had any similar experiences to share. I don't have any artistic talent, so unfortunately drawing up a visual might be difficult, but I'm more than willing to work with someone who can. Thank you to everyone who heard this. This happened to my dad about 10 years ago. He was out gardening, and a storm picked up incredibly quickly. He looked up when he heard a sharp noise and a crack. The wind was picking up and felling trees in the forest behind our house. The wind, though, thanks to his fence, which was rather tall, was only skipping over the top of him, and he wasn't really affected yet. So, ignoring it, he tried to be as productive as possible, as he was tending to his garden. Without really realizing it, the wind picked up, and before he knew it, he was in a full-blown storm. He knew at this point he had to go back in, and our garden is very long, so it would be about a 2-minute walk before he'd reach the door. He got up and started to make his way back, when he heard a crack. He turned around to look behind, and a tree was falling directly to him. Fortunately for him, he was only hit by the very top. It did knock him over, and he got a gnarly cut on his head. But had he not noticed sooner, or been just a few steps back, it's likely that he would have been hit by a far heavier part, and that could have been the end of my dad. We're very grateful it wasn't the case. Moral of the story, kids, don't stay out during a storm. I was 16 and living with my dad. I was getting ready to go to sleep, and suddenly it was like someone sat on the foot of my bed. I felt the weight settle down and the mattress/box spring creak a little. I was laying on my side facing away at the time, so I sort of half sat up and half turned towards the foot of the bed. I could just barely make out the outline of a hunched over shadow figure sitting there. The moonlight coming through the blinds gave it a weird shimmery effect, almost like The Predator, but with shadows, if that makes sense. I just kind of froze and all the hairs on my body stood on end. Not wanting to disturb whatever it was, I slowly laid back down while trying to keep my eyes on it. It was facing away from me, and it didn't seem to be aware of me, or perhaps just didn't care. After a little while of staring at it, I slowly pulled my covers up over my face and started to silently cry a little bit, because it was just too much. I was more terrified than I had ever been in my life, and my adrenaline was racing. I don't know how long it was, but eventually I felt the weight ease off the bed. I sat there listening to any signs of what was happening, too afraid to peek out of the covers. I'd seen horror movies, and it sounded like a really bad idea at the time. A moment later, a bunch of hangers in my closet jingled, and I ripped off the covers to look, but whatever it was had gone. On the floor of my closet lay some clothes that had previously been hung up. Over the summer, my friend and I got a call from another friend who asked us if we were up for an adventure, so naturally we agreed. Our friend wouldn't tell us what this adventure was until we had already gotten into the car and were on our way. He laid out the plan to us. We were going to break into a cabin to meet a boy he met on Tinder. The area was pretty familiar to us, and we were already mid-route, so we were down. We drove up this long driveway to get to the cabin that was isolated enough for us to not get called, but not to the point it was concerning or out of self-service. The boy we were meeting up with walks into the driveway and breaks into the cabin as we wait outside for him to open the front door. My friends immediately start exploring the cabin and going into all the rooms, but I was feeling uneasy and stood in the kitchen. The boy we had met went into one of the other rooms, and my friends returned to the kitchen with me. Tinder Boy walks back out of the kitchen carrying a shotgun and 2 rounds he had retrieved from wherever he had gone. He starts pointing the gun around, and I immediately begin yelling at him and asking him what the hell he thought he was doing. After scaring the piss out of us all, he just laughed and put the gun on the kitchen table. Seeing that we were uncomfortable, he tells us to follow him to the basement, to which we all reluctantly agree. In the basement, we begin telling stories to break the ice and try to get to know what this boy's deal is. As he tells his own story, he pulls out his pocket knife and starts throwing it around and sticking it into the wooden support posts, bringing back the anxiety in me. He then says he's bored of the basement and brings us back up to the kitchen, where he then steals alcohol from underneath the sink. He offers us all drinks, but my friend and I are more of the smoking type, and didn't want to get caught, so we declined. We all roll up and then head to the porch. On the porch, my friends and I are all standing there smoking along the rail, as he sat back behind the table. I got a weird feeling, so I turn around to find him taking pictures of us. This made me feel really uncomfortable. So I ask him what he's doing, and all he responds with was another laugh. My friends and I all share a "what the hell" look, and after having a few drinks, he goes around back to relieve himself. My friends and I convene to share our uneasiness and decide we need to get out of there ASAP. He comes back, and we had all made our way to the other side of the porch to distance ourselves from him. I look over again and find him taking yet another set of pictures of us. At this point, I can't handle the anxiety, so I text my friend to fake a text from her gram, so we had a reason to leave. She fakes the text, and we go inside to pack up our stuff. As we're packing up, he grabs the shotgun and waves it at all of us one more time before putting it back. My one friend leaves a handful of change on the table as evidence in case the boy tries to strike and pull some stuff, and this is slightly relevant later. So, our stuff was all gathered, and we were all more than ready to leave. We walk outside and head towards the car, when the Tinder boy pulls my friend aside, explaining to him that he needs a ride back because he had a curfew. Because my friend was interested in this boy, although I still can't figure out why, he agreed to drive the Tinder boy home. The whole car ride I'm preparing myself to defend with a knife, which thankfully never happened. We drop him off, and a wave of relief washed over me. I'm glad I'd never have to see this psychopath again. But fast forward a few months, I'm visiting home over Thanksgiving break, and my friends told me he had showed up to their jobs. They said that he pulled them aside and told them that if anyone were to ask, we had never went into that cabin and didn't know it had existed. I'm assuming the owner noticed the pile of change on the table and missing alcohol, and had alerted the police about it, but I'll never know for sure. Though ominous and bizarre, I just kind of laughed it off, what they had told me, because I now live 4 hours away. Months pass, and I'm currently on my spring break and visiting home. A different set of friends and I decide to go to one of the local thrift stores, as I needed a fitting room, and I go up to one of the employees and ask for one when he turns around, and it was the Tinder boy. My heart sunk and anxiety washed over me. He walked me over and didn't say a word. I think my drastic hair change may have thrown him off. Thank God. I believe I was a target for demonic possession, or something paranormal, for most of my childhood and young adult life. I have a lot of stories about my experiences, but I always highlight a few of them when I tell people. I was raised to believe in whatever I wanted by my family. They are not churchgoers, however, they are mainly agnostic, and I'm atheist. My mum didn't believe me for years, and now she does. My best friend didn't believe me, and now he does. My ex didn't believe me, and now she does. I've thought about going to church just to ask for some information. However, I haven't been bothered by it for a few years now. Take what you want from this. I pride myself on my honesty, and all of this is true. The first recollection I have of it was in grade 2. I was in bed trying to fall asleep. This orb was floating around my room. It was white on the black and slightly opaque, just whizzing around the room. I was scared right away. It randomly stopped, and it felt like it was looking at me. Then I just froze in fear. It charged me, and I snapped out of the paralysis and ran to my mum's room, who was angry that I woke her up and put me back into my room. This was when I started to sleep under the covers, with a light on, until I was 19. I was haunted for years. Little things would happen. Little stuff would go missing, or things would be moved. Not like your car keys or wallet, but my glasses would not be there where I placed them right on the nightstand beside me when I fell asleep. They would all of a sudden be downstairs on a counter or in a cupboard. I would feel like something was watching me from time to time, and not that normal sixth sense stuff you feel when someone is watching you. Completely different level. Stuff like this became a semi-normal life for me. Whenever we moved, it would follow. Let's start with grade 11, around Christmas. My mother just got divorced, and we, my mother, me, and my cat, Tiger, were living at my grandparents' home. My mum was on vacation in a warm country, and my grandparents were in Arizona. I was in the house all by myself. This isn't some Hollywood scary grandparents' house. It was a premium new condo in the suburbs. My room was downstairs, and when you leave the bedroom there's a big living room straight in front with an older TV in the corner, directly in the corner of the living room. There was also a bathtub to the left. I woke up in the middle of the night, not being able to breathe. I felt a force on top of me, and not like a fatty sitting on you, but as if the blankets on top were not movable. That feeling I mentioned about something watching you was now stronger than it ever had been. The door, which I had closed, was wide open, and all the lights were off, including the lamp. I always leave it on when I go to sleep. I always leave it on. I was terrified. This was the scariest moment of my life. Then all of a sudden, Tiger, my pet cat, jumped on my bed, all bushy-tailed and hissing. The lights turned on by themselves, and I was relieved by, which is my best guess, it. Tiger jumps off the bed and stays in the bedroom at the door, staring all bushy-tailed and hissing at this corner of the living room where the TV is. It's pitch black, and I felt it instantly when I looked into the corner. This horrible, intent feeling, like when someone you hate is looking at you with the intention to kill. This corner of the living room should have been lit up from the light in the bedroom, but it was pitch black. I had to call my uncle and tell him I needed him to pick me up right away. He had to come to my bedroom to behold me in underwear, because I was too scared to get dressed in case it came after me again. Tiger's eyes didn't leave the corner of that room until my uncle came back. My uncle got mad at me when I told him the reason he had to wake up to get me. Thankfully by this time my mum already believed me. And I'm 17, ladies and gents. A fully grown young man had to call his uncle to get him. My best thoughts on Tiger saving me was that the ancient Egyptians believe about cats. Look it up. I think there's a little truth in everything. My memory gets a little fuzzy here. However, I was hanging out with my best friend at his house, and he's known about it, but doesn't believe anything I tell him. Until this night. My best buddy's family are rich. He has a big double-door entrance room with one very small window and this huge king-size bed and an 80-inch computer monitor, which really is just a TV. We were downstairs in his room on his bed watching Paranormal Activity 1 on the computer monitor while eating pizza. The doors were closed and the tiny window shut. The pizza box was set up on the computer chair in front of the TV. The whole bottom of the box was on the seat with a whole pizza in the bottom part of the pizza box. With the lid open, very little, So in the middle of this movie, the pizza box lid folds up and opens completely by itself. We'll look at each other and look back, and the pizza box shoots off the chair and lands on the floor. After that, my best friend believed me and started to hate it. I came over a different time and we were talking about it, and he randomly got up all mad and started to mock and attempt to talk to it by yelling into the air. He said something along the lines of, "Leave my friend alone, you coward," blah blah blah. We hung out and it was time to go to sleep. I passed out on the couch in the downstairs living room and he fell asleep on the recliner. This was the first time it had done something to someone besides me. I was already half asleep when all of this happened. So this story is what he had told me the next morning, which I remember some parts of. So he was sleeping and woke up to the flashlight being on, which was odd, so he guessed it was it. He tried to wake me up, which I just said to go back to sleep. He screwed the light in all the way, so there was no way to turn it back on, then put it down. He woke up again to the light on. I remember this light turning on and him freaking out with what happened next. So we shut it off again, and this time woke up to being pulled out of the recliner with the light on again. It scared him, and we actually never spoke about it for a long time after that. My ex was Mexican and a Catholic. She had Jesus pictures and crosses and other Catholic stuff everywhere. She knew about it, and it took a few months after we moved in together for her to believe me. That weird stuff happened whenever I was home. After she believed me, she wanted to go to a card reader who was a friend of hers. She promised that she didn't say anything about it to the card reader or anything pertaining to scary stuff. However, this card reader was horrified by the card she drew. She said something was following me, which I already knew. This happened in Iraq in 2018. It was a very stormy day, and you could say thunder and sandstorm covered the whole sky, making it an orange color. The wind was so strong, making the doors open and close, making the wind slam roughly without stopping, making the windows slam roughly without stopping. And there was this howling sound, like screams and roars. I was alone in my house. My family were all at my grandfather's to visit. I was playing some games and trying to ignore the weather, and the sound was just getting stronger. It was creeping me out. After an hour of playing games, I heard someone knock at the door. I looked out the window towards the street and saw that no one was there. I thought it was the wind, so I ignored the sound and resumed what I was doing. But the knocking persisted. I returned to the door to see who it was, but before I even said who's there, I waited a moment, and there was a response saying in an old tune, "I'm an old man, can you let me in your house? I can't stand in such weather, I just can't handle it." After that, I opened the door. His whole appearance was strange and very odd. He put his long white beard, and he wore very old clothes and a black and grey turban. He was putting some small cloth in his mouth as a mask to protect himself from the sandstorm. His right eye was so white, it looked like snow. He was a tall man, however his right hand was extremely dark, and he was wearing some strange rings that I have never seen before. And he had black fingers with 2 rings on each. It was very strange. He sits in the chair and I look at him and say, "Do you need something, sir? Perhaps water or tea?" He looked at me with a smile. "That would be really helpful. Bring me some." I get him what he asked for, and he thanked me for the drink, and after about 2 hours we spoke normally. I asked him who he was and why he was wearing such odd clothes, and about his dark hand, and he looked at me and smiled. Since you were very kind with me, I will give you 2 gifts. One is to answer your question, and the other gift will be a sight and what will happen in the future. I looked at him, quite confused and curious. I wasn't sure about what he was saying. He told me that he was a sage, a hermit, a magician, a sorcerer, that he's many things and travelled from many parts of the Middle East, and he's seen many things. He said that his dark hand was one of the steps to becoming a magician, and it was to get struck by thunder or lightning in his hand, so he must put the hand on fire for a full day and then on water for 3 days, and in doing so gain control of the elements. About these strange-looking rings, he said each ring was a jinn, and inside they work as his servants. He asked if I wanted to know what would happen in the future. I looked at him and said yes. He told me that I would be moving to another country for a year, then one of my family members would die peacefully, and told me that the Middle East would have some problems, but it would be fixed years later, and told me that Europe and America will have disasters, especially America, concerning ice and fire. After telling me all of this, he began to walk to the exit door and began to leave, and told me that he would be back next year at the same time on the same day, thanked me for everything, and was gone. After that, everything he said came true. My grandmother died in the hospital. She was in a coma and her brain stopped. She was dead, the doctors say, and that she died without any pain. She looked so peaceful. And looking at the Middle East, there are problems. Hopefully, they'll be fixed soon. And America had very low temperatures which made it very cold, and almost freezing winds, as well as there being the Chicago forest fires. It seems like everything he said was coming true. I'm waiting to see if he'll return this year, and which omens he predicts for the future. A bit of context. I live in a 1-story house with a bayou behind it. We have railings on our windows/doors because we've been broken into in the past. I've never really been afraid to stay home alone until recently. I always felt something unworldly in our home. A long time ago, we had this scary incident. My younger sister and I shared a bedroom when we were kids. Our family was religious, so we had a cross in the wall between the 2 of our beds. We went to a party one day with our entire family and stayed there for a few hours. I want to make it clear that everybody went to the party. My mom, dad, older sister, younger brother and I all went. We came back home and I saw that the cross that was hanging between our beds was missing. I checked under the bed and there it was under my sister's bed. To this day I have no explanation for it. My parents were also shocked, but didn't think much, so we put it back on the wall and nothing had happened to it since. That was my first real encounter with something strange. There were times where I'd lay in my bed playing with my DS, when the TV would all of a sudden turn on by itself. I had to stand up to turn it off, but it would continually turn itself on 2 or 3 times later. I wasn't sitting on a remote or anything. Everything just remained normal for a few years, but then things began picking up again. There was a time when my sister had her door knocked on and blamed me for doing it. I told her that I never touched her door, and things felt uneasy again. On another occasion, my door opened entirely by itself one day. All of the windows were closed and only the AC was on. The door was slightly cracked, but I don't believe the AC would just open the door the entire way slowly by itself. This was a recent incident, perhaps a year ago, but it scared the life out of me. I was just alone in bed, browsing on Twitter when I heard this noise. I can promise anyone that it wasn't the Candy Crush game music, because I heard the crushing of candy leaves and the distinct yum from the game. The music was also really familiar, since I played it a lot in middle school. It sounded very clear and I knew it was real. It sounded as if someone was actively playing it. I was home alone, and it freaked me out. My dad was at work, my younger brother was at school, and my sister was walking home with a friend. Once I stood up to investigate the music, it stopped. The music skipped. My heart sank. Goosebumps flooded my arms, and I bolted to my front door and stayed outside until my sister came home. I wish I had recorded the audio, because it would have made her believe me. This incident scared me incredibly. Now I'm sharing this as other things keep happening. I'm home alone, and I keep hearing this toy go off. It sounds like an elephant toy with a honking sound, and it's going off during random intervals. When I go to see what it is, nothing's there. I'm completely paranoid and freaking out at the moment. My mum died at her home, and I was with her for the final days of her life. We put a hospital bed in the living room, and I was on night duty. My mum would wake up at the randomest times and be laughing and caring and have full conversations with someone. At one point she was laughing so hard and told me to pick up my brother's playing cards. She kept throwing them on the floor. Her brother was her best friend and was coaching a baseball game when she died 15 years ago of a sudden heart attack. She rarely mentioned him after death because it was so traumatic for her. So it really caught me off guard when she talked to him like he was there. She was awake and coherent with me and could clearly see something I could not. Fast forward 6 months. My mum had passed away, and I was back in the same living room all alone. I called my 9-year-old nephew to FaceTime, and we chatted for a bit. Then he suddenly got all quiet, scrunched up his nose and looked very confused. He said, "Who's that man?" I was like, "Huh? I'm home alone." Then all of a sudden I got really scared and asked, "What man?" "The one in baseball clothes who keeps walking back and forth behind you." My mind was blown. A couple of days later, I asked him to describe the man to me, and my nephew told me very specific things about the guy he saw. I knew that he was describing my uncle. Black hair, moustache, wearing baseball clothes, and after that, I knew without a doubt there is a life beyond here, and I truly believe we have angels among us. When I slept in my old room, I would often feel breathing in my face, as if someone was kneeling next to my bed and breathing right at me. It never bothered me, because it felt like someone was watching over me. When I was home alone, I could sometimes hear the door handle of my father's room go up. It makes a very distinct sound that can't be replicated because it's an old and creaky door handle. I've switched rooms over the years, and now sometimes I hear the sound of cloth scraping over the floor, as if someone were walking round with a heavy robe or something. But I could never pinpoint the exact location of the sound's origin. One time I was trying to sleep when I suddenly heard a noise from my closet. I carefully open it and see my empty coat hangers flop around a bit as if someone had just gone through them. Nothing bad ever happened, but sometimes I got the feeling that I wasn't alone in that house. The floor in the hallway was always creaking, as if someone had just stepped on it, and there'd be times where I'd faintly hear someone walking up the stairs. It was certainly unnerving. This happened about 5 years ago, but I still remember it like it was yesterday. I was living in a new state, and I wanted to mingle with the singles, so I set up an account on OkCupid. I matched with this guy Justin, who had just moved to the area, and we decided to get dinner at a local bar. Dinner was great. Justin was great. He was ridiculously tall, standing at 6'6", and very country. He was a breath of fresh air from all the hipsters in town, and I was already making plans to see him again. We walked around downtown a bit after dinner, and he invited me back to his place for drinks. I agreed to let him drive me in his truck, as I had been drinking and didn't feel comfortable driving my own car. We get back to his place, and I decide to check out his basement. I had never seen one before, while he makes us some drinks upstairs. Okay, I was pretty naive. We go upstairs to his room, drinks in hand, and we're sitting on his bed, talking about his experience in the military, and Justin is still just being a super nice and sweet guy. But he then starts to get really pushy about me finishing my drink. As I bring the glass up to my mouth, I notice some pink powder at the bottom. I put it back to study it, thinking that the cup was dirty. He watches me look at it and says, "Oh no, I only use that cup for water, it's fine." I take a sip of the drink, and it was extremely bitter, like when you let a pill linger in your mouth for a bit too long. My gut instinct was to pour it out, but he kept insisting I drink, so I kept taking tiny little baby sips so that I didn't appear rude. Curious about his military experience, I asked him if he's killed anyone while he was deployed, and his whole face lit up like Christmas. Hell yeah, and I enjoyed every minute of it. Then he proceeds to tell me about it. At this point, I started to get really uncomfortable and wanted to leave. I couldn't just leave though because I didn't have my car. And he then tells me that even back home in Montana, he's done some things because things happen in the country, and it's a place where the law doesn't always hold up. I'm starting to feel a little spacey from the drink, so I put it down and tell him I'm not really interested in it anymore. He asks me what my greatest fear is, and I tell him, and he responds with, "Oh, that's weird. Most women fear being assaulted by someone they've just met." I didn't know what to say, but he laughed it off and switched back to nice guy Justin. We're having a normal conversation about life, and I decide to lay down on his bed where I find a gun under his pillow. Cue Scary Justin. He tells me that it's only there for protection, but that he would love to screw a woman at gunpoint someday. He grabs the gun and starts playing with it, and I'm convinced that this is the day that I'm going to die. Yes, it took all of this before I felt this way because his roommates were home when I got there, so I'd felt safe. He proceeds to tell me that his absolute greatest fantasy is to kidnap a random woman and keep her as a slave for devious activities, and then to end her. I don't even question it, because he's basically at climax just thinking about it. I feel helpless and terrified. I notice my phone is dying and start thinking of an escape plan. I wasn't sure that my puny 5'4" self would be able to successfully fight off his muscular 6'6" military experience. He lays down next to me, starts to touch me, and I go completely frozen in fear. I guess at some point his roommates left because we heard them walking through the front door and up the stairs. His whole demeanor goes cold. He stands up and says that he's taking me back to my car. I'd never felt more grateful in my life when I saw my car sitting in front of the bar. I drove around town for a while to make sure he wasn't following me, and promptly blocked and deleted all his contact info. In hindsight, I should have probably alerted the authorities, but I figured it wouldn't have gone anywhere with no evidence of wrongdoing. I'll be glad to never lay eyes on him again, and can only hope that his greatest fantasy is never lived out. I was at my dad's. My stepsister, my father, my stepmother, our dog, and myself were at the house. My dad has his stereo hooked up through the living room, so it will play surround sound. To shut everything down, you must turn off the TV and the stereo system. Otherwise, you'll have picture and no sound, or have a TV with no picture, and sound throughout the living room. I usually slept out in the living room on the couch. At least I used to. One night I was getting ready to sleep. I turned the speaker down low so that I could have some background noise while I tried to sleep. I think around 15 minutes passed. The light from the TV went away, and the sound from the speakers stopped. I thought that it was very odd, and before I could react, I heard something that made me freeze in fear. The massive living room was filled with a moaning that no human or animal could make. The only thing I could do was cover my ears and bury myself in my pillow. I lay on the couch, listened to my heart pounding out of my chest, and the sound of wind chimes filled my ears. I was terrified. It felt like something was in the room with me, and even more so because we didn't own any wind chimes. I finally worked up the courage and ran through the house and barricaded myself in my stepsister's room and covered myself on the floor. I could feel something lurking outside the room and remember crying. I somehow made it through the night and told my family what had happened. They brought up times that other paranormal events had happened in that house, and it took me 3 years to be able to sleep in that living room again.